All right, good morning. This is Nick, creator of HEYS Reviews, and this is episode number 15 of HEYS Reviews Lives, My Money, Mammon. Thank you for being here. Thank God you made it. Welcome to the party. Hold on to your butts. We are in for a bumper episode this morning. It is Friday, the 2nd of February, 2024. And as you may have guessed, this episode is all about money. Money. It's a gas and it's a root of all evil, so we are told. But is that really true? And where does the money come from? And where does the money go? Very, very important question. Where does the money go? Because it seems to go a hell of a lot easier than it comes, doesn't it? That could just be me. Maybe I'm just not so good at looking after my money. But it seems to be very smoothly transitioned in one direction, which is outwardly and away from me. And it's a little more of a challenge to get it to go in the opposite direction towards me. But, hopefully, the episode I've put together today will help us all learn something about this most mysterious and ubiquitous of control systems that keeps people obsessed and turns people against one another and makes them do crazy, incredible, immoral, horrible things in many cases. But hopefully this does not have to be the case forever, and we may be able to turn things around with a little bit of learning. And so, with that said, welcome. Lovely to have you here. Anybody out there in internet world, wherever you may be listening, I hope you're well and healthy. And we made it through January, so that's something. That is something. January was quite wild. Let's see how wild February is going to get. I'm feeling good at the minute. I've got a holiday on the horizon. I'm going to be getting out of here. So this was my last chance to get another full-length, long HEYS Reviews Lives episode in for you. And so I cobbled this together over the last few days, and I've been reading and sifting through information and frantically highlighting and then pulling my non-hair out when the highlighting disappears, and then re-highlighting the things that I've already highlighted once, and so on and so forth. But the good news is we're back on a good quality webcam. I had some tech issues earlier this week. They are now resolved, and I have to give a shout out to the company Nexigo, who created my webcam, because they were very good in arranging for me to have a replacement at no cost. But, it was kind of on them to do that anyway, because the first one I bought packed in after 8 months. Didn't even get a year out of it. But hopefully this one will last longer. So let's see. So thank you for being here. Let's get right into the show. I've got a bunch of articles, book recommendations, and some podcasts and interviews and documentaries as usual. And this is going to be a challenge to get through all this morning. So I think we should dive straight into it. Thank you for being here. If you got any willingness to do so, drop a comment, a like, a thumbs up. These kind of things, they help us grow and reach more people. But it's not really about quantity, it's more about quality. It helps us get to the right people. But that's all that matters. As long as somebody is out there and listening to this and getting some value from it, then it's worth doing, in my opinion. But we're going to start off today's episode at The Guardian. And this is an article that is a year old, but very relevant to today's topic. So this is a headline which says 90% of schools in England will run out of money next year, heads warn. And this was 2022, October. So we are now in the future. And I don't remember headlines coming out to the effect that 90% of schools had run out of money. So maybe this was a bit of fear porn. But let's dive into it and see what they say. So 9 out of 10 schools in England will have run out of money by the next school year as the enormous burden of increased energy and salary bills takes its toll, The Observer can reveal. It's funny how it says The Observer can reveal. We're reading The Guardian, right? Why are they quoting another newspaper? 50% of heads say their school will be in deficit this year, with almost all expecting to be in the red by next September when their reserve runs out. And then we've got a quote here saying, "There are no easy fixes left," said Paul Whiteman, General Secretary of NAHT, N-A-H-T, which is the National Association of Head Teachers. NAHT. Schools are cut to the bone. This will mean cutting teaching hours, teaching assistants, and teachers. So I can see where this is going. Can you? When we get rid of the teachers, what are we left with? Well, we're left with some sort of software, most likely, some sort of AI monstrosity that is uncanny, sitting there scanning the faces and the retinas of every pupil in the classroom and maybe shooting them with laser beams if they misbehave. You can imagine it, a big telescreen at the front of the room with some sort of computer-generated person on it who reacts and interacts in real time with the students. I could see it going there. And it's so much cheaper, and they never get tired, and they don't have to go on cigarette breaks or lunch breaks. But yeah, we have not got enough money to fund teachers. That's quite a dire situation we're in. Although, depending on your view of of state school education, that might not be a bad thing. The Reverend Steve Chalk, he has an Oasis Foundation running 52 academies in England, because they're not schools anymore, they're academies now, said electricity and gas costs for schools in his chain had rocketed from $26,000 a year to $89,000, and that was even with a price cap. So incredible hikes in energy, largely due to the government's policies, the push to net zero, which I covered in my previous episode, the Climatriarch. That was episode 14 on this channel live stream. We talked about net zero, and we're gonna touch back upon that topic later on in this episode. But this push, this provocation of Russia via our comrades in arms over at NATO, and then blaming that whole situation for these price caps and really it's just companies gouging their prices. We've exported our ability to produce our own energy, to do it here within the country, within our own borders. So we got rid of all those jobs, we exported it, we became dependent upon a supply chain that is international and convoluted and unnecessarily complicated. And now we are at the mercy of these companies who can just force our schools into bankruptcy. Not only our schools, as we're going to find out very soon. But this rise, so they're talking here about the foundation is having to find an extra $4.5 million for the teachers' pay rise. Now, what I've been noticing as I've been reading these articles is that so often the people wanting a pay rise is kind of not blamed, but it's always mentioned. It's always mentioned with these huge problems that we're having financially, and the schools are running out of money and the councils are running out of money, and we just can't find the money for these pay rises. And there's always this sort of implication that people who that people wanting a pay rise is part of the problem here. And as usual with the mainstream, they don't tell you the real problems. They don't give you so you don't get to get the high resolution picture of how it all fits together. And you're sort of left with an impression of what the problem is. In this case, they had to go in there and mention it, the teachers' pay rise. And the rise, which is 5% for most teachers, remains significantly below inflation. Yes, isn't that the case for everybody, pretty much, unless you're a really high-flying bigwig at the top of the pyramid, in which case you'll be smashing that inflation rise many times over with your bonuses, because you are the priority in these kind of situations. And maybe that's right. Maybe it's not. We got another quote here from Chalk saying, any government that neglects the welfare and education of its children had better be saving up for its future mental health and benefit bills and investing in the justice system. So interesting. And I think there's something to be said here, but I don't think that it is the education of the children which protects against mental health issues in the future. I think it's the socialization aspect. I think it's children being around other children, being able to interact with them, and that's all largely done on the playground and in between lessons, because during lessons, the only function and purpose of what goes on in the lessons is to indoctrinate your child, to squeeze out any modicum of creativity, to make sure they never learn self-confidence and curiosity, stamp all these things out, make them obedient, sit down, put your hand up, ask permission, follow the rules, do what teacher says, and if you don't, get laughed at and shamed by your peers, and you are confined to a room of children that are your age, so you never learn about properly cooperating and interacting with people older or younger than yourself. You are graded, and those with the correct grades and the better grades get cheered and praised and made examples of, and those with the lower grades get shamed and made to feel stupid. And this whole system has been expertly explained by John Taylor Gatto, the New York City Teacher of the Year, 2 years running, I think. And so the idea that schooling contributes to good outcome in mental health is absurd. But I will say in terms of this quote that at least children get to socialize. They get to hang out with other people and play games, and that's very, very, very important. Ratcliffe's trust is having to spend more on mental health support for children and staff struggling in the cost of living crisis. The school regularly provides food for desperate families, as well as helping parents claim extra benefits or challenge rent rises. Yeah, so this is a situation that we're living through and is being deliberately orchestrated by the political class, the parasite class, and those who they serve. And we're going to learn more about that later in the episode as well. Families who have never required support before are coming to us, he said. There is a great sense of shame for the dad who works every hour he can, but still has to walk into school and ask for help. And again, as usual with these kind of articles, especially with The Guardian, no insight into what the true cause may be, no actual naming and shaming of the politicians who've brought in these kinds of measures and the people that they serve and cooperate with and ultimately are subservient to themselves. None of that. They're not doing their job, but they are painting a picture of really just how kind of dire and stressful life here in the UK, the developed nation of the UK, the first world country, used to cover the globe with our empire, have created some of the most incredible artists and writers, literary figures, scientists of history throughout history, and now we can't afford to feed ourselves, and our schools are bankrupt and shutting down. And not only are the schools bankrupt and shutting down, but Guardian is also telling us that at least 26 English councils are at risk of bankruptcy in the next 2 years. So this is from August 2023. So it's a newer article, and it's not just the schools, it's also the councils. So, what's going on here? At least 26 councils in some of Britain's most deprived areas are at risk of effective bankruptcy within the next 2 years, according to a leading local government group, which says many authorities simply have nothing left. These kind of headlines, they only really make sense if you understand money and where it comes from and how it's made. And I'll tell you where it comes from. It comes from nowhere. It is made out of thin air, magically, with the press of a button. Tap, tap, tip, tap, tippy, tap. Computer says yes. Money appears magically and is created just with nothing to back it up, with nothing of value that it can be redeemed against. So it is literally just ones and zeros on a computer screen, or just pieces of worthless metal and paper and plastic. Now we got plastic money. And it doesn't have any intrinsic value, and that's a key part of it. So when we're saying we're bankrupt and we're running out of money and there's no money left, that's because of the money system that has been established and built and forced upon everyone in this country and many, many others. And that is the deliberate outcome of this monetary system that has been allowed to parasitize our nation and its people. So this sort of this bankruptcy, it's not kind of like, oh, we just the money, we just lost it fell down the back of the sofa. It's like, no, the system's working perfectly, and this is how the system is designed to work. It is designed to make everybody who uses it go bankrupt for the most part. And you got to question if your schools are going bankrupt, if your councils are going bankrupt, if the whole government is completely bankrupt, and I'm talking morally bankrupt as well as fiscally bankrupt, then you got to be really starting to pay attention and waking up and starting to wonder, what can we do about this, and what are the steps and actions that we can take, instead of just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic and arguing about over who gets to sit where. But this article is telling us that according to a survey of 47 councils in the north of England, the Midlands, and on the south coast, rising costs will blow irreparable holes in budgets that fund crucial local services. And I would wager that you're already seeing that. If you're here in the UK, you probably are already aware of ways in which this is impacting you. Certainly where I live, one of the main issues is potholes. The roads are absolute. You need some sort of 4x4 off-road buggy to safely get around the roads up here now. It is insane. And if you go to most town centers and even now increasingly city centers, there is just empty shops, homeless people, graffiti. It is a grim sight. It is getting more and more Mad Max-like by the day, it seems, to me anyway. So this is part of the reason why. Is they're running out of money. There's no money to do anything. And despite the taxes remaining the same, despite all that money that gets chopped out of your pay packet automatically, there's no money to do anything. What's going on? The group has called on the government to provide additional funding to local authorities struggling to manage. So what does that mean? That means, government, we want you to take more money from people through taxation. Or government, we want you to borrow more money from the Bank of England, which is not England's bank. It's not publicly owned. It is a privately owned entity who have been granted the permission to be the sole source of money. And it's not really money. We shouldn't really call it money. We'll call it fiat currency. It's a more accurate term. And the Bank of England shouldn't be called the Bank of England. It should be called the Rothschilds Private Bank or something like that. And they've managed to establish themselves and put themselves into a situation where the rest of us are forced, coerced, bullied, and brutalized into using their product. I mean, I say that. It's not quite as bad as that yet, but it's getting there. It's coming to that point with the advent of digital currencies. For now, we're still free to exchange in other ways if we so choose. We do have that freedom. We're very lucky in that sense. But I don't know many people who are doing it. And that is one of the solutions that we should talk about and discuss and explore, I think. But yeah, calling on the government to provide additional funding, that is just saying, rob some more fiat currency from people, please, government, or borrow some more fiat currency, please, government, and further in debt future generations. So I don't know if that is a smart move to solve the problems. I don't know if that's the best solution. What do you think? A spokesperson for the government said it had already agreed extra funding, adding that councils were ultimately responsible for their own finances and should not take excessive risks with taxpayers' money. Yep. Well, I mean, this is a tricky one, right? Where does the buck stop? I highlight this because the idea it sprung up in my mind is that we should just pay any taxes we do want to pay voluntarily to the local council who run the place where we live. I don't see why our tax money has to get hoovered up, scooped up, sent down to London. In my case, it's hoovered up, sent down to London, and then it's sent over to Preston, and then Preston doles it out to my local council. So and obviously each link in that chain scrapes the cream off the top before it gets back to fix the potholes in the place where I live. Now, I'd rather my money just went straight to the local council, and I told them how much, and I told them what it was for. That would be much better and preferable system to me. I don't see why I have to fund London when I don't really live there, and I try not to go there as I go there as little as I possibly can. So maybe there's some sort of reform that we could imagine, some sort of localized system of voluntary payments into to have these things done that benefit us where we live, instead of sending it off to all corners of the country to be stolen and squeezed and manipulated. There must be a more efficient way to do this, right? And I mean, you can't deny that the answer to that question is yes. But then you just got to ask the question, well, is it just incompetence that it's not efficient? Or is it something else? Council said the most common cause of financial pressures was increased demand for children's social care services after the government said these should be given equal priority with adult social care and funded accordingly. So that's pretty interesting. The most common cause of financial pressures is children's social care services. So a lot of social care issues going on out there. Of course, children are sort of chucked into these situations because both parents are forced to work, because you can no longer, in most cases, support a family on one income. And so you need mom and dad to get out and go somewhere each day to earn some money to pay the bills that are shooting up rapidly, to buy the food, the price of which is shooting up rapidly. Meanwhile, children need to get shipped off to be raised by someone else, some strangers who you don't know and probably don't have your children's best interests at heart. And this is the situation that's been created deliberately, because if you think about it, when you have both mum and dad going to work every day, you get to collect twice the amount of taxes, don't you? And that's pretty good for the people who like to rub their hands together. I don't know if you can hear that. Can you hear the sound of that? I don't know if my mic picks up that sound. But we've got, in conclusion, we've got a bit more here, but at the same time as inflationary pressure, councils are facing increasing demand for services, particularly in the care sector. So we've got children's care, children's social care, adult social care, and the care sector. This is something I've talked about before on the show, which we have this increasingly elderly population. We have more people who are learning disabled. We have bigger increase in things like autism. We have, and then this is other groups of people adding onto this drain on the public purse, because they're relying on handouts and relying on sort of free money, which is not free. It's free to them, but it's not free because it's taken from other people. And as this group of sort of dependents grows and grows and grows, we also have simultaneously the number of people paying into the system shrinking because people are not having children. As I've covered on the show, the replacement birth rate is way, way, way low. Not there at all, not where we need it to be. And we've got the welfare system, which is such an open free-for-all in many cases, that you can come here and get a whole host of goodies and benefits for nothing, really, to you, no cost to you, apart from just making it here. and maybe a bit of danger and treacherous journey if the weather's bad. But it's an unsustainable system is the point. And the Guardian kind of publishing these kind of articles, but telling you absolutely nothing about the true causes and the causal factors that have led to this, and absolutely nothing about any sort of solutions or possible changes that we might make personally with the people around us, who we cooperate with, who we love, who we live near, to try and buffer against this. None of that. This is useless journalism. I don't even know why I'm still looking at this. I should just move on. But there's a couple of bits I wanted to highlight here, specifically that it's both Tory run and Labour run. So even the Guardian, who are incredibly left leaning and overtly left leaning, they're admitting here that the Tory councils and the Labour run councils, that it's all bad. They're all as bad as each other and messing it up. Perhaps the Guardian, or this writer at least, is starting to realize that the left wing and the right wing are two wings of the same bird of prey. But the good news is they're going to give another $2 billion in additional grants for social care, which I don't resent, but I do think that social care system in this country is open to abuse. I've seen that firsthand. In fact, I've worked for many years as a social care provider, support worker, people with learning disabilities of all sorts, and the things you see in that system going on are shocking, really, in many cases. And the wages that they pay people who do those kind of jobs is also shocking, and the money is not going on the people who do those jobs. I can tell you that for sure. All right, moving on. So we got this story in the Telegraph, which is Barclays closes branch and tells customers to use a van in a graveyard. This high street bank will shut its last location in Hove next week. Check that out. Look at that picture. So if you are living in Hove and you want to go to Barclays to do your banking, you must go to this handy dandy little blue van parked in a graveyard near the church. Isn't that nice? Barclays customers in Hove will have to do their in-person banking from a van because it's closed its last branch in the area. And this van will visit once a week for the customers to speak to the bank staff, and it's temporarily being stationed in a graveyard because they can't find anywhere else to park for free. So Barclays won't even pay the parking for the Barclays van that shows up once a week. Barclays will not even pay for it to park somewhere accessible or easy to get to. They will only park it in the place that's free, and the only place that's free is this little graveyard. I mean, it's just It's crazy, isn't it? But, Barclays, they're struggling as well. They don't have much money because they've closed more than 1,000 branches since 2015. So we got the schools running out of money, the councils running out of money, the banks running out of money. And the branches that Barclays have been closing are being replaced with mobile and remote branches in different locations. Oh, that's good then. But yeah, look at all these closure dates. The bank has also set up 10 banking pods across the country, which are structures in shopping center car parks and retail parks. I haven't looked at these pods yet. I didn't click that link to follow through on it, but pods doesn't sound good. Anytime you hear about pods, living in pods, visiting pods, traveling in pods, unless you're a dolphin, it's not a good thing. It's not a good word to be hearing. Because at some point these pods are just going to be like suicide pods when things are so bad. We've covered before on this show about the assisted suicide that's been rolled out in Canada, extremely successful and very popular and growing by the year. Pretty soon there's just going to be a little suicide pod. Get in there and it'll hoover you up and probably cremate you at the same time. And maybe just pop out a little keyring with your ashes in it or something like that. I was going to say you could probably, stick £1 in it and it'll do that for you, but we won't have cash at that point. It'll just be scanning your RFID chip that's implanted in your arm or something. Anyway, I'm spinning out a little bit here into fantasy land. We're not quite there yet. We can turn it around. Let's stay optimistic. But yeah, pods, not a good thing. They said, as visits to branches continue to fall, with the majority of people preferring to bank online. So it's because people want it. People prefer this, don't they? Because you're choosing it because you prefer to bank online. Well, is it that people prefer to bank online, or is it just people are so stressed they don't have the time to go to the bank anymore, right? Because they're just working every second that they can. They're spending all their time looking after their children. They're queuing up to access food banks. They're looking after their elderly loved ones, maybe loved ones, caring for loved ones who have recently been injured by a rollout of an experimental medical procedure. Maybe time is so tight and they're so stressed that they don't have time to saunter down to the bank and stand in a queue and then speak to the one person who's in the bank. For them to tell you to go and use that machine over there in the corner is what you need, So I thought it was a bit disingenuous to try and sort of hint that, most people prefer online banking. So they're saying we need to adapt to provide the best service for all our customers, which is a van in a graveyard. Is that the best service you can muster, a van in a graveyard? This is reflected at Hove, where we are delivering, and I highlighted that word because I hate it, and it's because it's corporate word. It's corporate speak. We have to drive through results and deliver the best possible, most efficient and sustainable. It makes me cringe because it's like dead language. It's a word, it's kind of like chewing cardboard. It's like, yeah, you can chew it and swallow it, but it is a word. It does fulfill the function of a word, but in this context and the way it's being used, it just carries zero sort of meaning or emotional influence or weight to it. It's a dry corporate thing to say, and you can see that seeping into our language from all avenues and all angles. But we are delivering new ways to support our customers and the community with options for those who need in-person services. Okay, so you've got options. That's good. And what's the option? Get on a bus and go to another town where they haven't closed the branch down yet. Like, that's just the most like corporate spin that's a prime example of corporate spin. We plan for the Barclays van to visit 1 day a week. A cashless banking alternative, right? So there it is. They're telling you again, they want to get rid of cashless. Want to move things onto cashless. We're pretty much probably, 80% there. You can, for the moment, still withdraw cash from cash machines, but I think many of us are just using the tap or the electronic payments, and so we don't realize really what a precarious situation we are in, and it's not because we've chosen it. Regardless of what this shameful outlet is trying to hint. We didn't choose it. It's not because we prefer it. We've been slowly and gradually nudged there. We've had our psychology weaponized against us. We've had the environment around us change subtly through a process of gradualism, a little bit here, a little bit there, a little change here, a little change there. And now we're at this situation where we're teetering on the edge of a cashless system. And once we tip over that edge, it's going to be a whole world of pain and hurt for people. Not to be alarmist and not to be scared, but just to say, get some cash out and start using it, because that is one way that you can signify and that you're not happy with cashless banking alternative, and you do want to keep some sort of privacy and anonymity and control over your money and where and how you spend it. Because once that privacy and anonymity is gone, you are going to suddenly find that you are very, very extremely limited in where you can spend your money and what you can spend it on. And at that point, at that point, it's no longer, it's going to be a completely different game. We're going to be living in a totally different world. And if you want to have a glimpse into that world, you can watch a TV series called Black Mirror. Barclays is also mulling plans to axe thousands of clients. I mean, just that sentence on its own kind of tells you everything that you need to know about corporations and banks in particular. They want to axe people. They want to chop your head off and behead you and get rid of you, and they're part of the agenda to do so. The Depop agenda, top of the Depops. We covered that on this channel. I think that was episode 11 of HEYS Reviews Lives. There is a depopulation underway. And the causes of that, are very hard to dig into because it's not covered in the mainstream. There's not a lot of transparency around it, but you can get a good insight into where it's coming from, who's pushing it, and why they're doing it, because they write books about it and you can buy them and read them. But I just thought this might be a little Freudian slip here, or maybe this is telling you out in the open, straight up to your face. Barclays, they're planning to axe clients. They're gonna because what loving and successful business doesn't want to axe thousands of clients. So they're getting rid of them because it's targeting $1 billion. It's targeting $1 billion in cost cuts, and that's gonna cause thousands of people to not be able to use its investment bank. This cost-cutting plan across the bank comes after it emerged last week that the lender was looking to reduce jobs in HR, legal, and compliance functions to save money. 2,000 roles earmarked for redundancy. So it's not only the schools, not only the local councils, the banks are struggling as well. They're axing jobs, they're axing clients, they're shutting down branches, they're moving it all online, they're getting rid of cash, they're removing your ability to speak to a human being. It's going to be automated, it's going to be AI controlled, it's going to be click through, press 1 if you want to speak to somebody about XYZ. Automation, that's what it's all about. And these big banks, they're aware of these agendas and these depopulation sort of movements and trends. I'm trying to make people aware in my small way on this channel, but they're aware of this. Otherwise, they wouldn't be shutting everything down and getting rid of all these branches and making they're running on a skeleton crew now because they're aware that in the future they're not going to need loads of people and loads of branches operating their business because there's not going to be any clients around or as many clients around to use it. So this is another article on a similar topic about millions to live in bankless constituencies by the end of the year. So 3 million people won't have a bank in their constituency by the end of this year. I think this was, this is from this month. So we're going to see more of this as the year unfolds. Banks and building societies have closed branches en masse over the last decade, with over 5,800 branches shut to date, which is 54 each month, meaning more than half of the branches that were open have disappeared since 2015. That is affecting NatWest, Royal Bank of Scotland, Ulster Bank, which has closed 1,333 branches, the most of any banking group. Lloyds Banking Group, Halifax Bank of Scotland has shut down 1,072. Despite some banks claiming that a majority of people are turning away from cash, cash usage has risen in recent years, accounting for 19% of all transactions in 2022, up from 15% in 2021. I'm just going to pause on that to have a sip. cash usage is up. And I've got a really lovely article for you later on by our good friend Ian Davis about cash, why it's important, why we should keep using it. So keep an eye out for that. But cash is on the rise. Simultaneously, banks are closing down and they're axing jobs and they're shutting outlets and branches. Now, the banks, money runs the world, and bankers and banking and this whole industry and this whole parasitical class of people who operate in the banking world, they are incredibly interested in risk management. And so you got to watch closely, very closely, what they're doing. Because if they're shutting up shop and if they're closing things down, when they have a monopoly, when they have cornered so many markets, so many people, so many countries, every country, in fact, has some banking entity that has cornered and monopolized that particular market, right? There's not many places where there's multiple currencies going around and you can sort of pick and choose. This town over there uses one thing and that town over there uses another thing. Those days are gone now. So these banking people, these banking entities, they've cornered the market, they've monopolized it, they've forced the whole world to use their product, and they've kind of wheedled their way in so that the reserve currency of the world is the dollar, and the rest of the world sort of has to have some dollars on hand for that reason. When they're shutting up shop and closing things down and kind of saying, well, we're not going to need to have these banks open because we're not going to have any, you should really take notice and really, it should make your spider sense tingle a little bit and kind of look into what's going on. Our research shows that millions of people could be without a local branch by the end of 2024 as banks continue to close at an alarming rate. So if they're happy to leave millions of people without that's millions of customers, isn't it? They're happily shutting up shop, and their business must be so good that they can get rid of millions and millions of customers. So that's a red flag, and that's slightly alarming, don't you think? Spiked, debanking, a corporate war on the unwoke. This year we must defeat the scourge of corporate censorship. I was really hoping for a second I was going to say corporate banking. I don't know why I thought that. I have read it before, but. Here, this is a good article about debanking. So this is kind of an insight and a window into the future of what it's going to be like, where and I've covered this before, but Nigel Farage helps get a new word into the dictionary, which is debanking, because he was kicked out of his bank and not allowed to use his bank anymore because of his political views. There was some back and forth and discussion and debate about what the true reasons were for him getting debanked. But when it came down to it, I think it was pretty obvious what the case was, because it's happened to other people who have the similar sort of views and opinions as he does. And so banks are stepping into the world of censorship and mind control now by saying, you're not allowed to use our service. And if you think a certain thing, say a certain thing, or have a certain opinion, sorry, no can do, you're not allowed in. So thanks to his masterful handling, this is Farage, thanks to his masterful handling of that dispute, the CEOs of both Coutts and its parent bank NatWest had to resign. And now everyone knows what debanking means. Well, it was happening before Farage. Farage just happened to be the figure that the mainstream media sort of highlighted in this, but it was happening. It happened very noticeably in the Canadian truckers protest, where what's he called? Justin Castro was shutting down the bank accounts of people who donated to the trucker convoy who were protesting against the ridiculous Orwellian, totalitarian, authoritarian COVID measures in that country. So Farage wasn't the first and will by no means be the last. He just happened to be the one that this mainstream apparatus want to shine a spotlight on, maybe in an effort to kind of boost this sort of divide and conquer tactic that Farage is kind of at the helm of. It's a kind of a right-left thing. He's kind of a populist, and he's well known for calling out the EU and spearheading the Brexit vote. And so he's the bad guy in the eyes of the globalists and the people who want to merge everything under a one world system. But, as always, it's a dialectic, and he is got his own skeletons in the closet, and there's certain things that he will also not tell you about and keep hidden from you if you choose to follow him and hang on his every word. So I wouldn't recommend that. So apart from the Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, which is the UK's banking watchdog, they launched into an inquiry into the phenomenon and concluded there was no evidence of anyone being debanked. And we later learned that the FCA's investigation consisted of asking the banks whether they had closed anyone's accounts for political reasons, and then taking their blanket denials at face value. Right. So well done, FCA, doing your job there, nice and thorough. This is the way it always kind of happens. Is, well, we'll ask them. Excuse me, did you do anything wrong? No, I didn't do anything wrong. Well, they said I didn't do anything wrong. So that's it. That's the end of the investigation. Nothing to see here. Move along, please. Tends to be how all these commissions pan out. Whether they're looking into terrorist events or they're looking into corruption. These panels, like the recent Convid inquiry here in the UK, finding no wrongdoing, and it's always a smokescreen to hide to protect the criminals, to protect the people who planned and orchestrated and went along with it, but to give kind of a public-facing appearance, show trial. It's entertainment, ladies and gentlemen. It is all a kind of planned play, pantomime. That's the word I'm looking for. I got there. It's a pantomime, and if you believe it, cool, but you're believing in a fairy tale. And the FCA is proving that to us here. So the question is, what would the new rules have stopped Coutts trying to debank Nigel Farage? Interestingly, the discrimination he experienced is already prohibited, which say payment service providers. So this was interesting. Payment Accounts Regulations 2015 say payment services providers must not discriminate against customers on the basis of their political or any other opinion. That's important there. That is important to know. If you are getting debanked, or you are having access to your banking services or your payments services restricted because of any other opinion, any opinion you might have, then you are protected by the Payment Accounts Regulations 2015, and you can take up that fight and maybe bring the case to court, maybe do something with that there. So bear that in mind, something that's good to know. These are the kind of these are the kind of freedoms and rights and privileges, I should say, and benefits, I should say, that have been granted to us by our political class, parasite class, that we can use against them. Because their system is obviously completely fraudulent, not based in natural law, not based in anything provided by the creator, the nature of this realm that we live in. It's just made up by other human beings, a bunch of human beings making up a load of rules and then punishing another bunch of human beings for not following those rules. But the rules are arbitrary, and they're not based in anything more solid than just the fantasy and the imagination of human beings. But occasionally we can use their arbitrary set of rules against them and hold them to account according to their own system. And this might be one of those opportunities to do so. Okay, so next I've got a video here, which I might be able to play a short clip of, if I can get my audio settings correct. And this is David Icke, and this video is 5 years old. You can see down here, 5 years old, and he's talking a little bit here about free speech. Very critical and very important information, because the whole point of free speech is that you have to tolerate people saying things that you don't agree with, and that might hurt your precious feelings. And this is true for all of us. And I get triggered and wound up by people, and I react, and people can press my buttons with things that they say. Absolutely part of being human. But it is upon you, and it is incumbent upon you, to learn to get yourself under control as best as you possibly can, and not give grant power to other people to manipulate you and control what's going on inside of you by making sounds with their mouths. And I was thinking about this the other day, and the thing is that certain things are sort of, we're not allowed to say it. It's banned. It's rude. It's unacceptable. Blah 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 blah. But if the same person said the same thing in a language you didn't understand, then it wouldn't be a problem, right? The point I'm trying to make is that when you're offended, you are the one creating the condition of being offended within yourself. So in other words, it's not the person who's saying the offensive thing that is creating the discomfort and the unpleasant sensation of being offended within you. They're not going inside you and messing around with your chemistry and your biology and your hormones and all this kind of thing. They're not doing that. They're not the ones doing it. They're making a sound with their mouth. And then in response to that, you are internally creating, and psychologically and biologically creating, this condition of being offended, which is unpleasant, which is unhappy. And it goes for all feelings, whether you create a response of sadness, anger, whatever it is. And the reason this is true and the way you prove this is because if that same person said the exact same thing in a different language that you didn't understand, you probably wouldn't react in the same way. So it's not the person saying the thing that causes the reaction, is my point. And yes, that can trigger. There is, okay, it's not wholly. They play some part in that, because we can shout and be aggressive, and we can be manipulative, and we can be very powerful in our spoken words. But there's some element within you that generates and has to be held responsible for your reaction. And you can't just blame it on the external thing and the external person saying the thing or pressing your buttons. Okay, does that make sense? Give me a thumbs up, a like, and a share, and a comment in the comments box if you can. I hope that makes sense. I was just thinking about it the other day when I was washing up. I was like, if somebody came over to you and started saying things that you find offensive, but they said it in Chinese and you didn't speak Chinese, then you wouldn't get offended because you wouldn't be able to understand it. So we got to detach a little bit from when people are speaking and saying things, and kind of recognize that when you boil it down, they're just making sounds with their mouth and vocal cords. They're just pumping air out of their face. Right? That's all they're doing. They're just pumping air out of their face. And you want to arrest them, and you want to close down their ability to access their own money, and you want to put them in a cage, or you want to restrict them from using online social media and platforms and going to certain, like, if you actually think that people should be punished and locked up in that way for pumping air through their face, then you got an issue, and you got a bit of a problem. And so this all ties in because of this debanking thing. As the system sort of creaks and wobbles and starts to disintegrate, because the money, the fiat money fractional reserve lending system that we have been forced to use is running out of energy. It's running low on currency. Currency is kind of becoming rarer. You can see how it's going to push us towards more restrictive authoritarianism and totalitarian controls on who can use and access money and what form that currency is going to take. And David Icke's got some very good points here about this whole situation and how important it is in these kind of times to be fiercely, staunchly dependent, defensive of free speech and protective of free speech. And so we'll play this little clip for you now. Did I mess that up? I can't tell if anyone heard it or not. Whoa, what's this? Did I press the wrong one there? Maybe I was supposed to press this one. Yeah. Sorry. Let's try that again. I think I got it wrong again. Is it this one? I
wanted to start with a question, but actually you've just raised something before we started about freedom of speech and something that happened to you recently. And it sounds like it's important to talk about. So how do you feel the freedom of speech is for us in society, and what do you think is wrong about it, and what do you want to change about it?
Well, I'd like to add some. I think that would be a good start.
Well, you can say what you want here.
You see, the thing is that what is freedom of speech? It's the freedom to speak. So I read a politician today saying, I agree with freedom of speech, but there are limits. Well, there's no freedom of speech then. Freedom of speech.
Is there still no audio on that? Oh, well. What I might have to do then is I'll just give you that video. You can watch it in your free time. But basically what he is saying is that freedom of speech, I would like to have some. And he talks about how it is curtailed and it is used and weaponized in order to shut people down and to limit their ability to make a living. Particularly in David Icke's case, he's been shut down. He's been banned from speaking, and that's all he does. He gets up on stage and he talks. That is how he makes his money. That's how he creates a living. He also writes books and publishes them. But you should be able to go and listen to anyone speak at any time, right? And the battlefield of ideas should not be restricted by shutting certain people down and preventing them from getting involved in the conversation at all. That's not how you make progress. Oh, the sound was working. Okay, we'll go back to the clip then. We'll go back to the clip because it's a good one.
Is the freedom to speak. If anyone's not allowed to speak, then it's not freedom of speech. It's freedom to conform to certain parameters of what are acceptable. And then what that's doing is giving power to some authority to decide what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And as we see, and we're seeing it massively now, once you give that power to an authority, it then starts interpreting what can and cannot be said in a way that squeezes and squeezes and squeezes more and more of what cannot be said. This is what political correctness is about. What is political correctness? It's simply manipulating the target population to silence itself. So those in authority don't have to. It's ridiculous. Now, people say, well, you say that people can say anything. Well, yes, I do. And I'll tell you why. There are laws against incitement to racism, incitement to hatred, incitement to violence. There are laws against that.
Are they laws you agree with?
Yeah, and if people use their freedom of speech to incite those things, then there are laws to deal with that, and those laws should deal with it. What I'm saying is, once you start censoring freedom of speech at the point of delivery, or even more sinister, before the point of delivery, by banning people from the right to have access to the communication networks or speak in public, that is what the fascists do. What did fascists do in Nazi Germany? What does any tyranny do? It wants to silence those that are exposing the tyranny and have a different version of events to the tyranny.
It wants to silence those that are exposing the tyranny and have a different version of events to the tyranny. Yeah, exactly. Well said. The whole interview is good. I'll put it in the links below the video. As always, David Icke has a lot of very good stuff to say. He has a lot of wacky stuff to say. That is the fun thing about listening to him, is taking what is useful and getting rid of what is not, and following the breadcrumbs and going down the rabbit holes and finding out, like, is he just crazy making loads of wacky stuff up, or is there a validity to some of the things he says? As with anybody, myself included, don't believe everything I say. It's about finding the stuff that is good and what is useful, what resonates, checking the things that make you incredulous. And I think we should do the same with David Icke. But in this case, on free speech, I mean, this man has lived through more ridicule, more attempts to shut him down. It's kind of a miracle in a way that he's still with us. And some might say very suspicious that he's still with us. If he is as legitimate and authentic as he would have us believe. But you can't argue that he at least stands up for free speech. And he does poke the eye of people who want to bring us tyranny, and he does stand there on his own 2 feet, pumping out his books, giving his 8, 10, 12-hour speeches and lectures, and for what it's worth, I think he's doing a pretty good job of at least pushing the needle in the right direction. So, yeah, I wouldn't hang on every word and believe every single thing that he says. But in this case, I think he has a very, very good 2-hour interview on the topic of free speech and why it's important. And this was 5 years ago. 5 years ago, before certain world events happened, before we kind of crossed through the portal into into the new world order. But yeah, a very good one. And that was sent to me by a member of my Telegram group. And I was really happy to receive that video and wanted to include it today because it's very relevant. Okay. So meanwhile, while our schools and our councils and our banks have all run out of money, and while we are being debanked for having the wrong opinion on topics, Facebook diversity manager admits to stealing more than $4 million to fund a lavish lifestyle, including more than $18,000 to a preschool for tuition. And I had to laugh at this person. So her name is Barbara Furlough Smiles. Furlough Smiles. It just tickled me because I hadn't even heard of the word furlough, and I know it's spelt differently, but I hadn't heard of the word furlough until people were getting furloughed and being paid to stay at home and not work during the great con of 2020. But this is a diversity executive at Facebook, and she's pled guilty, stealing more than $4 million from the company. She charged fraudulent invoices and received kickbacks. She abused the position of trust, and she has undermined the importance of her DEI mission. Well, I don't think she's undermined the importance of the mission. I think she's highlighted it and shown us exactly what that mission is about. Hasn't she? She hasn't undermined the importance of it because the mission is fraudulent from the start and is based on dividing people and making sure some have and some do not have and redistributing what people already have along some arbitrary lines and all done in the name of protecting and upholding morals and decency. That's not what it's all about. It's about a redistribution of wealth. And about taking from those who have and giving to those who do not have, which sounds good. It sounds all very Robin Hood, but in many cases, those who have, they have because they've worked and they've earned and they've sacrificed, right? And so how do you, and yeah, in many cases they haven't, but how do you differentiate? How do you not just scoop everyone up and say, okay, how do you make sure the people who've worked and sacrificed in order to get what they have are allowed to keep that? Well, you can't. And that's because that's not what it's about. Because all it's about is me getting to say who gets what. And so I think instead of undermining the importance of DEI, she's just revealed what DEI is actually all about. And look at that ridiculous coat that she's wearing. Motivated by greed, she used her time to orchestrate an elaborate criminal scheme in which fraudulent vendors paid her kickbacks in cash. She even involved relatives, friends, and other associates in her crimes, all to fund a lavish lifestyle through fraud, rather than hard and honest work. She linked PayPal, Venmo, and Cash App accounts to her Facebook credit cards and used those accounts to pay friends and relatives for goods and services purportedly provided to Facebook, which, of course, they never did. She also got the company to make payments for her benefits in other ways, including payments of nearly $10,000 to an artist for specialty portraits and more than $18,000 to a preschool for tuition. And then I like this bit at the end. Furlough Smiles used lies and deceit to defraud both vendors and Facebook employees, said Kerry Farley, special agent in charge of FBI Atlanta. The FBI works hard to make sure greed like this doesn't pay off, and those who commit fraud are held accountable. That is ridiculous. The FBI, maybe it would go after small-time crooks like this woman, because she is major small-time. But the FBI's purpose is not to go after everyone who is greedy and who embezzles and extorts. Oh no, they only go after the small fry fish, the small fish in the big ponds. They are not going anywhere near the big sharks and the real predators. So do not be fooled by that. I just thought it was funny how they had to put that little plug at the end. Oh, yes, we don't tolerate greed and crime. So this is the Telegraph again. Traders with prior knowledge of Hamas attacks made millions shorting Israel. Suspicious stock market activity suggests more than $100 million made betting against Tel Aviv shares prior to October 7 massacre. So interesting article because the admission that this happens. So prior knowledge of an event means that if you know about something that's going to happen and nobody else does, then you can profit immensely from it. Now, we heard a similar story of this, kind of a legend really, but it was in the 1913 book, Romance of the Rothschilds, which we read on this channel all 7 chapters of it we just read through and had discussions. That's on the live streams, and it's on a playlist as well, The Romance of the Rothschilds. There's a story about Nathan Rothschild, who was at the Battle of Waterloo, and he figured out who was going to win, and he hightailed it back to London. Or another version of it goes that he had spies there, and they hightailed it back to London. And then he was able to manipulate the stock exchange because he had advanced knowledge of the outcome of the war. He started planting the seed that it would go one way, and then he bought everything up because the market crashed, because he had such influence and power in that market. He bought everything up on the cheap, and then when the news came in that actually it had gone the other way, and Napoleon had lost, itchy nose there, he was able to buy everything back at very, very cheap, and make a huge killing. Or maybe the other way around. Sold it, and then that was it. Sold it high and then bought it all back cheap. But either way, his advanced knowledge gave him an immense opportunity and power to consolidate a massive amount of wealth. Excuse me. And so it's a similar kind of thing. It's a story as old as time, and this is how banking families and parasite people keep their situation, keep their position of power and influence and wealth. So it's interesting that the Telegraph acknowledges it in the case of Hamas, because obviously Hamas are the most evil organization that have ever existed. And so it's okay to tell us and focus on this activity, this suspicious stock market activity, suggesting that they had prior knowledge, because this kind of thing is done all the time, and it's done by everyone on all sides of everything, and it's just a kind of candid admission of the fact that this happens. And it's interesting to see that it's admitted here in this instance, but there are other instances of this happening where it is not admitted, such as right before the Big 9 event in 2001 September. There was a lot of this happening then, but that is very rarely talked about in the mainstream media, if ever, and it is left to the independent researchers and journalists and content creators to point that out, and to create documentaries and to create investigations and books explaining how that happened. But it did happen. It happened then, and it happens now, and it's admitted to by the Telegraph. So on the topic of money, investors with prior knowledge of October 7th Hamas massacre earned at least tens of millions of pounds short selling Israeli stocks. Traders with potential links to Hamas put huge bets against the Israeli economy in the run-up to the attack and could have made more than 100 million. So that's a fairly significant amount. But like any good bet, if you know the outcome before the event, then you're going to make some money, aren't you? If you know what's going to happen. And the report did not name the investors. Why not? That's a shame. Short selling involves borrowing shares and selling them in the hope that the share price falls. Investors aim to buy them back at a cheaper price, pocketing the difference. So that's exactly what Nathan Rothschild did back in, when would that have been? 19th century. Days before the attack, traders appeared to anticipate the events to come, wrote the report's authors. So the reason I wanted to include this is to show you that it is admitted in the mainstream that this happens. And then that opens the door and helps you accept that the evidence that this has happened before, critically right before the events of September the 11th, 2001. This is a good bridge and a good doorway into learning about what you may have written off in the past as being conspiracy theory. There was nothing. There was just like Arabs with box cutters and indestructible passports. But what about all this crazy trading that happened right before? In the days leading up, massive amounts of money. They shorted the airlines and it was totally out of the blue, totally unexpected, and very anomalous in terms of what would usually be happening, around that time on the markets. And so critical bit of admission there. But of course, the mainstream, they'll accuse one side of doing it, but we would never do that. But no, our side does it as well. And a good thing to be aware of. And so I thought a key article to include in this today's broadcast. The report said the level of shorting that took place as October the 7th approached was on a far larger scale than during previous crises faced by Israel, including the COVID pandemic and the 2014 Gaza war. It was in the top 1% of all transactions since 2009. Yeah, so how did they know? Well, of course, in this case, they'll say, well, they planned it because they're Hamas, right? And they said, we're going to attack on this day, and they told their buddies, and their buddies put in the trades. Well, yeah, so how do they know to short the airlines right before the Big 9 event in 2001 in September? Well, is it because they planned it? I don't know. You decide. Excuse me, I'm just going to take a sip. So this next article is the great 10 billion PPE shambles, staggering waste of taxpayer cash on overpriced, faulty or unused COVID-era equipment. As critics say, the sum is enough to give each NHS nurse a 100% bonus. Yeah, so this scandal's been ongoing for a while, but this article is quite a recent one, just last month. And this is a final report stating that of the £13.6 billion it spent on PPE, 9.9 has been written off because it's unusable. So money well spent. And this is the National Audit Office, NAO. And they have said, and the head of the NAO, Gareth Davis, as he said, the majority of UK's PPE stock is now of insignificant value. Wah, 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 wah. I mean, it was before. None of that stuff ever does any good. Has never been proven to work, particularly the face muzzles. It was estimated to cost taxpayers around £7 million a month in March 2022 to store the millions of remaining items. Some was even being stored in China, having never reached Britain. So we're paying China to store this stuff. Mr. Davies said that ongoing efforts to detect, prevent, and recover fraud must continue, improving public confidence that this drain on the public finances is being tackled effectively and efficiently. Yes, public confidence, I'm sure, is much buttressed by these efforts. Downing Street defended the losses by pointing to the havoc that COVID wreaked. Well, this always happens. Oh, COVID did this, COVID did that. When COVID made this happen, COVID made that happen. No, it didn't. The government made all these things happen, right? The human beings in the government made these decisions. The scientific advisors that they pay to tell them what they want to hear made this happen, right? Human beings happened, and all the fallout and all the outcome is down to the decisions of specific human beings who are put in positions to make these decisions and are parasitic and incompetent. Incompetent at best, deliberately parasitic and knowingly evil and cruel, at worst. It's on a spectrum there. And they're both not good places to be. But yeah, it just bugs me when people blame COVID. It was COVID. COVID did this. Like, no, that's not a thing. COVID it's not a thing. It's not an entity that has will, that can take action in order to create outcomes and effects here in this realm, right? So don't say COVID caused X, Y, Z. So Rishi Sunak's official spokesperson says it's important not to forget the circumstances in which the UK and countries globally found themselves during a pandemic when globally PPE was in extremely short supply. Okay. Yeah, so just reinforcing the narrative, which has been thoroughly and completely debunked at this point. But Telegraph, was it the Telegraph? No, this is Mail Online, so I shouldn't be surprised. But the Mail Online still pushing this narrative that there was a pandemic, that COVID did things because it's an entity that can do things. Okay, so that is the sort of poison pill in this particular article. But still making a good point and telling us about this incredible waste of money. Look at that. This is look at that picture. This is a nature reserve where all these pallets of PPE have been dumped. Officials had sold, recycled, burned, or donated, including to Ukraine. So, you know, feel good about it because we sent it to Ukraine. 269,000 pallets of PPE. DHSC said that every pallet that had to be gotten rid of has saved £2.49 in storage per week since September 2022. I don't know if they're like, if they've included that sentence in order to be like, yeah, but we're saving money, so it's a good thing. Or if it's just to kind of mock. I have a feeling it's to mock and laugh at the reader, because, you know, this kind of stuff, it's pitched at, it's like, it's insulting. The way it's written, the level it's written, the way it's written, the tone, the things they leave out. It's like really pitched to kind of mislead. Like, it's written from a place of contempt. That's how I feel when I read it. I feel like I'm being insulted when I read this stuff. And that's how I think everybody should feel when they read this stuff. It's like, you seriously speaking to me in this way, in this kind of condescending tone that insults my intelligence. That's how I feel when I read this stuff. So I'm never quite sure if it's deliberate or if they're just, you know, so bad at what they do that they're not even aware of it. Liberal Democrat health spokesperson Daisy Cooper said, "This is a sickening level of waste. Billions of pounds of taxpayers' money has been poured down the drain because of this Conservative government's incompetence." So she couldn't resist. She couldn't resist getting that dig in at the Conservative government. But look, any government, they would do the same. It's not going to make a difference, because the whole point of government is to waste billions of pounds of taxpayers' money. That is the raison d'etre of government. It is to make sure, it's to slap you around the face and then make you say thank you and be grateful that it's only a slap around the face. You know, that is the whole point. That's why they exist as an entity, and that has been proven and borne out time and time again historically, and it's only ramping up and getting even more overt and crazy in the last 4 years. So this money, 350 million, the amount wasted on PPE could have built. Oh no, sorry. So this amount could have paid for 28 new hospitals. This is what we could have had instead of pallets of pointless face masks. We could have had new hospitals. We could have had all sorts of new things. And so this scandal is all around this woman, Baroness Michelle Mammon, and their company, her and her husband's company, were commissioned to secure this PPE, right? And I hadn't looked into this person before, and I thought, who is she? What's she all about? And what can I learn? By quickly checking good old Wikipedia. And just excuse me again. I have a really itchy nose, but it happens because we're live streaming. Okay, Michelle Mammon, or is it Monet? I guess it's Mammon. I don't know another way to pronounce that. It's got to be Mammon, hasn't it? She's from Glasgow. She is a Scottish businesswoman and life peer. And this is inexplicable to me. She's an OBE. She's a life peer. And this just makes absolutely no sense, because when you read her Wikipedia page, so this is the stuff that is like, this is approved narrative. This is information that is given to you by the establishment, and like, yeah, you can have that. This isn't, you know, this is not including any of the stuff that's been hidden or occulted or buried, right? So she grew up in a one-bedroom house with no bath or shower till she was 8. Okay, so she's from humble beginnings and working class, and she didn't have a wash for the first 10 years of her life, and her young brother died. So, you know, she came from nothing. And then at the age of 15, she left school with no qualifications to be a model. Then she got a marketing job, and she invented qualifications to help get the job. She was then made redundant, which prompted her at the age of 23 with we find out, she's got a child at this point, and I guess a failed career in modeling. At the age of 23, she's already got a child. She sets up her own business using the redundancy compensation she received. That's pretty canny. What was the business? Well, she's selling lingerie in Selfridges in London. Right. So this story is almost on par with Bill Gates or Steve Jobs inventing the iPhone in his garage, or whatever the nonsense story is about those guys. They just came from nothing. Mark Zuckerberg just created Facebook in his dorm room at Harvard. Right? So she somehow manages to launch a lingerie brand in Selfridges in London because she was wearing an uncomfortable cleavage-enhancing bra. And she thought, oh, I can make this more comfortable. So she's a failed model. And she's wearing push-up bras. And she manages to get a deal selling them at Selfridges. And this is at the age of 23, and she's already married with a child at this point. She claims that her bra was worn by Julia Roberts in the film Erin Brockovich, but this was denied by the film's creators. And so it goes on. In 2014, a former operations director for MJM, which is her business, wins a claim for unfair dismissal after discovering that Mammon had authorized electronic bugging of his office. So she's spying on her employees. And then she threatened to sue her critics when it was revealed her company had paid a substantial sum of money into a controversial tax avoidance scheme. So she's spying on her employees. She's avoiding tax. She's lying about her product. Then she launches a weight loss pill and falsely claims the efficacy of the product has been proven in clinical trials. So these clinical trials never took place. The product was never proven to work. Then after in 2016, she's made a peer, and she changes the company formation so that it no longer has to publish public trading accounts. So then she has this fake tan product under the company Ultimo Beauty, and she's trying to hide the transparency into her business. It turns out they only had £23,000 in assets anyway. Then in 2017, she and her partner launched a £250 million residential development in Dubai. In April 2019, the Sunday Times reports that the development was on hold with the construction incomplete. Then she launches a cryptocurrency in 2018. By August 2018, the Sunday Times reported that the project had flopped and all investors had been refunded because they only managed to raise £1,600 of their 80 million goal. And then I think we find out what her true role and reason for any kind of fame or peerage or OBE is. And it's because she's a television personality who's appeared in a BBC Two documentary, and she's been on a BBC One, she's presented a BBC One series, and she's been on 9 episodes of The Apprentice, and she's been a contestant on The Apprentice, and she was a contestant on 71 Degrees North, and she was a contestant on Celebrity MasterChef, and she was the subject of a BBC Radio 4 profile in 2015. Her political career. On 27th of August 2015, the Prime Minister announced that she would be a life peer. So this is David Cameron, so it was a conservative fella. And she was criticised because her first vote in the House of Lords was to vote against a motion to delay government cuts to tax credits, which would affect 3 million low-income families. And she didn't want... Yeah, the motion was to delay those cuts, and she was like, no, let's get those cuts going through right away, quick, sharp, snap, snap. Her attendance in the House of Lords, she has only attended the House of Lords on 12% of the days in which it was sitting, and that was in 2017. And she didn't even debate on the Brexit bill. And in December 2022, she had not spoken in a debate since March 2020 and had last voted in April 2022. Awards and recognitions. She was appointed Officer of the Order of the British Empire for her services to the lingerie industry. I mean, come on. In her personal life, she's been sending racist text messages to a wealth manager of Indian heritage. She said, "You are a waste of a man's white skin," apparently. But a spokesperson said she's not racist because her and her husband have built 15 schools in Africa. And then that was followed by a message from a lawyer saying that Mammon could not access her messages and had no detailed memory of them. The allegations of racism were referred to the House of Lords Commissioner for Standards, but they did not investigate, as her comments were said in a personal capacity and not in her capacity as a member of the House of Lords. In 2022, she reached a settlement. Mammon embarrassment, right? So this is the quality of person and the caliber and of person that gets an OBE, that gets to become a life peer, that gets flaunted around and pushed in front of you via the BBC, and which gets embroiled. And I didn't even talk about the PPE the controversy there, and that is a whole thing in and of itself that I didn't even mention. Because the whole point is these are the caliber and the quality of people who are, ostensibly running the show and in charge, and the best of the best that we can offer, and the brightest that we can raise up to the lofty, dizzying heights of government. This is the quality of the person involved. So something to feel good about. So where else is our money going? Well, the Home Office is spending $36 million on private boats to pick up channel migrants. Okay. So this is good news as well, I suppose. Plans to replace the aging fleet have been pushed back by 2 years. The department has resorted to procuring vessels from the private sector on a temporary basis as it quietly revealed a further 2-year delay in its plans to replace the UK's current fleet of border force cutters. Work to replace the 5 cutters and 6 coastal patrol vessels will not start until March 2026, 4 years later than originally planned. So Rishi Sunak has argued that a new state-of-the-art fleet would ensure Britain maintained its maritime capability to tackle illegal migration. There is no tackling of illegal migration in this country. It is facilitated, encouraged, and if you have a problem with that, you're a racist bigot. Throw yourself off a bridge, please. But great money, I'm sure you will agree. Interestingly, I highlighted the number 36 because that pops up a lot in stories, mainstream media stories. And, for you numerologists out there, and if you maybe are freaked out by numbers and their sort of meanings and interpretations, you might be interested to know that every number between 1 and 36, when added together, comes to the total of 666. But there's debate as to whether or not 666 actually is what was intended as in the Bible as the devil's number. It might actually be 616. I'm not a biblical scholar. I have no idea. I just remember that 36 has that feature. I think that's right. I might be totally mistaken. You might no, that can't be right. It can't add up to 666. Maybe you times them together or something. I forget. The spending on private vessels comes on top of the £9 million that the Home Office was forced to spend on a new project to extend the life of the existing cutters and coastal patrol vessels by a further 5 years. So not only has the original plan to replace these been delayed and has run over and inefficient, but we're also then having to fork out money to hire boats privately to pick people up and bring them here and, welcome them with open arms into our welfare system. A Home Office spokesperson said all commercial contracts are in line with government procurement rules, which are designed to ensure the best value for taxpayers. And don't you feel like you're getting the best value as a taxpayer in this country when all this money is being spent on PPE contracts and boats to help people come here who really have no business coming here? Meanwhile, your schools and your local councils and your banks are all shutting down and disappearing before your very eyes. Good to know. It makes you feel warm inside. So an interesting article here that I was unable to highlight because of the website. It doesn't let you do that. But it's the borderless welfare state, the consequences of immigration for public finances. And this is a Dutch writer, and it's on the website ResearchGate. And the summary is, the report Borderless Welfare State deals with the consequences of immigration for Dutch public finances. It focuses on the fiscal costs and benefits of immigration, that is, the costs and benefits of immigration for the Dutch Treasury. It answers the following questions. What are the fiscal costs and benefits of immigration by immigration motive? To what extent can immigration provide a solution to population aging in the Netherlands? So really good detailed study here, and it's all looking at, okay, so what is the what is produced by the people who are coming here, and what is sort of added to the system, and what is taken out, and how does that affect public spending, which, you know, everyone who lives in a country where your taxes are hoovered up, you should have an interest in your money, where it's being spent and how it's being spent. And I thought this would be a good one to get on the record and to give to people to read, because it's pretty balanced and fair and very very well. It's just like a solid analysis. It's free from the kind of the emotive language and the stirring up that this issue often gets treated with. You know, it's just a bit of a more rational approach. So it's like, okay, let's look at the data and the facts and the figures. And let's see if bolting in all these extra people and now allowing them to kind of settle here is a benefit overall. So good. I can't get into it in too much detail here. It's quite a long report, and I wasn't able to highlight key quotes. But there it is and you can have a look at that. The link is below. Oh, well, it's not right now, but it will be later on. And this was an image shared by the Lawyers of Light on the Telegram group on the same sort of topic of government spending, which is a breakdown of the estimated spending for 23-24 in the billions, and it's broken down by what it's being spent on, and what this works out as the average per household over the year. So you can see here, and they've highlighted the Lawyers of Light in red, defense. Now, defense is code word for war. They just rebranded it. You'll know that I just got a book recently about the Profumo affair. I've put that on my shelf somewhere. And this was back at a time when they had the Minister for War, and that was his title. And they've since rebranded and rechanged it, and now it's all defense. And it's defense, and we're just doing it to defend ourselves. And how you can't argue with defense, can you? You can't argue with spending money on defense. But is it really defense when what you're actually doing is arming that group of people over there in that other country and helping them and facilitating their ability to kill people? Is that defense? Shipping out weapons and expertise and munitions to places like Ukraine, to places like Israel, is that defense? It doesn't sound like it to me. That sounds like offense. But terminology and semantics aside, is costing £32 billion, and that's working out as £1,000 per household for the year, which is being spent on defense. And I think the case the Lawyers of Light are making here is like you could consider withholding that £1,000 if you're in a position to do so, because this is what kind of frustrates me about the whole taxation system, is that it gets taken off you. You can't opt out of it, and you have zero say or influence over how it is then spent once it's taken off you. This is why I was saying earlier that it would be better if you could just give it to your local council and say to them, look, I want this money to go on the roads, and I want it to go to that school over there where my child goes, and I would like you to also spend some of it on social care, because I have some elderly relatives or whatever that require that service. Another cough there. And so being aware of the breakdown of your money and how it is spent and doled out and dished out would really help facilitate some intelligent and productive conversations around this whole process of enforced taxation and then money being spent on totally ineffective things. As I mentioned, the whole purpose of government is to just redistribute other people's stuff. And if you're put in that position when you're not being productive, you're not producing anything of value yourself, you're just the ones in charge of redistribution. Of course, you're going to give yourself a good deal, first and foremost. Then you're going to give your friends a good deal, second. And then thirdly, whatever's left, oh yeah, okay, the rest of you can have that. And you can sort of, argue over it and fight over it at the bottom. So it's a totally fraudulent, parasitic system. And breakdowns like these really help us to get a grip on what is going on and have useful, productive, and forward-moving conversations about solutions. So I wanted to include that as well. Lawyers of Light is a fantastic Telegram channel, put out really empowering and useful information, and it's free from kind of rhetoric and dogma aimed at just firing people up and getting them incensed and angry without actually providing any solutions or ways to move forward to get things done. So useful. And if you use Telegram, you can join my Telegram group, which is right underneath here. And that's just where we have chats about books. Mainly, we share resources, links to other talks and interviews that we find valuable. And it's just a way to build a bit of community and kind of partake together in this effort to preserve knowledge and information and pass it forward into the future as we face crazy censorship. So, on the topic of spending, this is a military assistance to Ukraine since the Russian invasion, and this was published just last month. Scroll down here and we can find out that the UK assistance, so the UK is one of the leading donors to Ukraine alongside the US and Germany. The UK has pledged almost 12 billion in overall support to Ukraine, and of which 7.1 billion is military assistance. The government announced a further 2.5 billion of funding for 2024-25. So it is not decreasing, it's increasing. And this money is being, well, what's the cycle of money? You know, the Bank of England prints it, you earn it, the government scoops up 20, 30, 40, whatever % of that, and then they ship it out and send it over to other countries. Like, how is that a sustainable model? How is that in your best interests? How is that any of our business and our responsibility to fund conflicts in all these other places? I think that the answers to the questions I just asked only make sense if you take a very high 10,000 foot view of the geopolitical landscape. But not only that, also the last 120 years or so, and the books written by people such as H.G. Wells, by people such as Bertrand Russell, books that I'm working through in other live streams on this channel where we sit down, we read a chapter and we have a discussion. But they talk about one world government, and they talk about The Open Conspiracy is the name of H.G. Wells' book. And it's going to be a scientific, technocratic, one world system run from the top down by scientists and AI and software, and all automated. And these kind of maneuvers where public funds are being extorted from the citizens and shipped out to other countries all play into that effort. And these kind of moves can only make sense when viewed in light of that particular narrative. I think it's the only narrative that makes sense of it from my point of view anyway. The mainstream narrative and the government narrative that's put out there doesn't make sense. And so you've got to go somewhere else, read some books, get educated and get learned on these bigger pictures, these bigger agendas, the Fabian socialist strategy of a tortoise, of gradualism, of small incremental changes, the totalitarian tiptoe, as David Icke likes to call it, who featured earlier in this episode. You got to find that narrative that actually makes sense of all this crazy decisions being made by our so-called politicians, which, you know the word politics, poly means many, ticks means blood-sucking creatures. But yeah, they're sending all this money out there and shipping it abroad while your schools go bankrupt, while your local councils go bankrupt, while your banks shut down. But, you know, at least we can fund the wholesale murder and slaughter and conflict over there in another part of the world. The UK is providing lethal and non-lethal weaponry, including tanks, air defense systems, and long-range precision strike missiles. Defense. It's all defense. It's just defense. While the UK has committed to training Ukrainian fast jet pilots, combat fighter aircraft will not be provided. So, good to know. Thank you very much, UK government, for rinsing us of our money, of our currency, shipping it out. But this isn't just the UK government doing it. No, this is top down from the very, very top, because the World Bank's new 1.5 billion loan to Ukraine will provide relief to households and mitigate impact of Russia's invasion. So the loan is guaranteed by the government of Japan under the Advancing Needed Credit Enhancement for Ukraine Trust Fund. Well, these acronyms. Advancing Needed Credit Enhancement for Ukraine Trust Fund. Advancing Needed Advanced Ukraine. Okay, whatever. And forms an integral part of the international support package for Ukraine to meet its financing needs in 2023. So the Japanese government are involved in exactly the same process of rinsing their people, extorting them, imprisoning them for not allowing them to take money from them, and then shipping it out of the country to another place. And who knows what happens once it leaves the bank accounts within our shores. Is anyone following up or investigating that? Is anyone going out there to make sure that it is being spent on what we are told it's being spent on? Look at the PPE scandal. That was just a deal given to a friend. You know, it was like, okay, we'll give you start this company and you order in a load of PPE from China and we'll give you the contract and you make a killing and we will just sit back and enjoy that and shake and pat each other on the back and you know, good job, well done. Who's to say that the same thing isn't happening here? You know, people I think are hesitant to question spending on defense. I should do the it's defense. But it is absolutely another avenue for money laundering and for backroom deals and under the table handshakes and these kind of crony, you look after me and I'll take care of you type situations, right? The military is absolutely that in part. Which is a shame because a lot of people get into it because they're good people and they want to do something useful and valuable and noble and heroic. And, you know, it is how that people's better nature is weaponized and utilized and exploited. Just, again, like I mentioned, working in social care, when I used to work in social care, they paid you the absolute legal minimum that they could possibly get away with. And just kind of banked on the fact that people would show up and do that job because it's, you know, people want to do good things and they don't want to be just doing immoral work. They'd rather take the pay cut and get paid badly in order to do something that is moral and that requires ethics and integrity and requires care and kindness and compassion and those kinds of instincts within people tend to get exploited and chewed up and used by the system in place just in order to turn a profit and make more money for the parasites. So be wary of that. This is another good acronym that I thought was good. The Public Expenditure for Administrative Capacity Endurance. Peace. Yeah, so funding Ukraine and making sure that this conflict continues on and on and on and on and on. And we're gonna label that peace. Come on. I mean, this is the kind of thing that tells you it's sham and a con and a pantomime, isn't it? So zero hedge. Moving on. U.S. debt hits a record 34.001 trillion. That's trillion with a T. T for Trevor. Trillion. 34 trillion. Wow. So since this is a topic we have covered more or less daily for our 15-year existence, we don't need to say much. Suffice to show a chart of total US debt since Zero Hedge launched in Jan 2009, when total US debt was only 10.6 trillion. What? What? We sure have gone a long way since then. Okay, so 2009, what was that? That was 15 years ago. The debt was 10.6 trillion. So in 15 years, it's gone from 10 trillion to 34 trillion, right? And this is just, the U.S. debt, not but it's the same, in most Western countries with a central bank, countries with a banking system linked to the Bank for International Settlements, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, which we're going to learn a bit more about pretty soon. But look, this is the situation they're creating. It's an unsustainable situation. It has been rigged from the start, designed from the start to collapse. And this has happened before, and they know it happens. And these are the boom-bust cycles. People talk about the markets. They've got this boom-bust cycle, and it grows, and then it contracts. And that's just like the nature of it. It's the nature of it because it's been designed to do that. So that people with foreknowledge of events, people who orchestrate events, can short and trade and do insider trading and insider deals in order to get ridiculously wealthy. And they'll poo-poo that side of things and hide it and say it doesn't happen. And we've got all this regulation. And we've got all these pieces of software that make sure that none of that extortionate practice can occur when they know exactly what's going on. It's all criminals run. It's a system designed by criminals, for criminals, run by criminals, right? Criminocracy. And this kind of thing just shows you right on the face of it. And if this isn't kind of alarming, I'm not trying to alarm people again, but it's about being aware and awake to the reality of the situation that you're in and that you're faced. Now, remember I said the US dollar is the world's reserve currency. What happens when this all collapses? What happens when the US dollar is rendered worthless because of the hyperinflation caused by the ridiculous amount of money printing and debt that has been allowed to accumulate. Not only allowed to accumulate, but encouraged. In fact, it has to accumulate because that's the way the system works. Is debt-based system. It's a usury debt-based fractional reserve lending system. But some context: U.S. debt increased by $1 trillion in 3 months, $2 trillion in 6 months, $4 trillion in 2 years, $11 trillion in the past 4 years, and that's an exponential picture. At best, one may only prepare for the inevitable hyperinflationary outcome, which would be good news to what is now over $1 trillion in interest expense. After all, someone has to devalue the currency. All that interest is payable in. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So this is the hyperinflationary outcome that I think a lot of people don't want to acknowledge or face or prepare for, but I think it's baked into the system and is kind of inevitable at this point. But if you're not preparing for that and not aware of it, then it's worth becoming cognizant of this outcome, how likely it is, how it's likely to unfold, and when it's likely to happen, and taking some steps to preserve your wealth, or at least stock up on things that you're going to need to ride that out. Best example, I think, of last time that happened would be the Great Depression in America. What happened to people during that time? How did they survive it? How did they get through it? What kind of things became valuable in that scenario? Because this is a scenario where money is really, currency, fiat currency is going to, you've seen the pictures of people with wheelbarrows full of cash going down to buy a loaf of bread. That is the outcome and the circumstance which occurs thanks to this sort of banking system, banking practice, right? So another good article there with lots of hard data to look at. And this graph, which I think I have here on this tab. Look at this. This is incredibly, I'll give you a moment to look at that while I just have a sip. So there's a clear pattern there, isn't there? U.S. Civil War right there, and then it kind of peaks, and then it goes down. World War I, same pattern. World War II, same pattern. And look where we are now. So you've got Civil War and the World War I. They kind of hit the same level. U.S. debt to GDP. World War II hit this level. What's that, 100? And we're almost there. We're at 98% now. So what happens when it gets to 100%? Well, your guess is as good as mine, but could it be another world war? Are there things happening out there which seem to suggest that World War III might be breaking out and might occur very soon? Are there conflicts going on? Is there money being funneled into defense at unprecedented amounts? Excuse me a second. These are the kind of questions that I think we should be asking. And I like Zero Hedge for doing a pretty good job of bringing some cold, hard data to bear. So we're not kind of speculating, and we're not just floundering around trying to rely on mainstream news sources, which are never reliable or useful or helpful or high resolution enough to make good decisions based upon. So thank you to Zero Hedge for that. Okay, Wall Street on parade. This is a little more finance oriented, and a little more in depth, deep dive type stuff. The New York Fed has extended its $500 billion bailout facility to a sprawling Japanese bank you've never heard of. So interesting that Japan have popped up again. Not only are they involved in the Ukraine situation, but they're also getting sort of interlocked and bailed out by some of the US banking firms. So this article is telling, who is this? This is Wall Street on parade, Pam and Russ Martins. Without any action from the US legislative branch, otherwise known as Congress, the Fed has unilaterally decided to become lender of last resort to Wall Street trading houses, whom the Fed prefers to call its primary dealers, and deposit-taking banks, including the uninsured New York branches of foreign banks like Norinchukin Bank. The notice from the New York Fed about adding Norinchukin Bank to its bailout facility grabbed our attention for two reasons. First, it came out on a Friday, which is typically when financial entities dump bad news they hope will disappear over the weekend. And also because the standing repo facility was successor to the trillions of dollars in still unexplained emergency repo loans the Fed had to pump into Wall Street in the fourth quarter of 2019. And so, look at this. It's just going up, 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 up. It's parabolic. All these graphs. And the one of the key quotes down here, yeah. The fact that JP Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs were from the get-go also borrowing heavily from the Fed suggests that the three firms were counterparties to each other's derivatives. So there's this kind of mythos out there surrounding the financial world and money and how it works. And it's shrouded in this cloak of secrecy and complexity. And that's done on purpose because they want the average person to be just so confused that they throw their hands up and say, well, I don't get it, whatever, just leave it to the bankers. They obviously know what they're doing. It's so complicated. They obviously deserve their massive bonuses and ridiculous salaries because they're dealing with what might as well be magic and sorcery. They just make things up. They just invent things and make things up, and they create these situations where they are borrowing from each other and backing up each other's loans with counterparties and derivatives, and it's all made up, paper-based, human-created, man-made systems, right? Which when it's man-made, anything made by man can be manipulated by man. And so these currency systems, which are so convoluted, are so complex and convoluted that they just have to eventually fold and collapse and implode. And that has been baked into it from the start. All this kind of money printing, kicking the can down the road, inflationary policies, quantitative easing, it is all there, and it's a whole mechanism designed to harvest the energy, the workforce, the life force, and the product, the production of regular people, and harvest that, and to scoop that up and transform it into actual valuable wealth assets. Maybe that's property or art, priceless art, or gold, silver, precious metals, artifacts of these kinds, right? The stocks and the bonds and the paper assets and all these kind of derivatives and all these sort of, I don't even know, like the variety of financial instruments that are out there, but they're all just made up, and they're all therefore open to manipulation in the same way that if you know a certain event is going to happen, you can play that event to your advantage and make a lot of money on it. It's all kind of built to be manipulated in that way. And these kind of articles really reveal that to us and show us how it is just unsustainable. It can't keep going. The Fed hadn't made, so he's telling us the Fed hadn't made these emergency repo loans since the financial crisis of 2008. So 2008 happened, massive amount of quantitative easing, loads of money printed, flood it into the system to keep it alive. But basically at this point, the financial system is just this kind of zombie entity which is dead on its feet, but it keeps getting money pumped into it in order to just keep it alive for a little bit longer. But it can't stay alive forever. And in order to pump more money into it to keep it alive, what needs to happen is some sort of event, some sort of narrative that we can sell the public as to why we have to print all this money and pump it into the system to keep it alive for a bit longer. So this happened in 2008, and now it happened again in 2020. And the question is, now that we are kind of on the brink of this whole thing collapsing and imploding and going tits up again, as we like to say here in the UK, what is the narrative that will be rolled out that they're going to use to justify a massive an injection of money in order to keep this thing alive for a little bit longer? Or are they just going to let it totally collapse? Well, another excuse that they have for harvesting all this money and printing all this money and pumping it into the system to keep it alive is net zero, which I covered in some amount of detail on my last episode, the Climatriarch. But this is the conservative woman, and they have the climate scaremongers, another 40 billion pounds of your cash down the net zero drain. The idea is that carbon dioxide emitted from burning all those trees will be captured and piped into storage somewhere under the North Sea, in theory making it carbon negative. So this is all about Drax. And I did talk about this in the last episode, where they are fitting carbon capture technology that is going to cost an extortionate amount of money to fit this carbon capture technology. And as I said then, there is carbon capture technology exists. It's called plants and trees and soil that is underneath the hooves of ruminant animals. And that sequesters carbon when it is utilized properly and has animals on top of it grazing and pooing onto it. And then the trees also capture carbon. The trees and plants, they build themselves out of the carbon in the air, so it captures carbon. Why we need to develop all these ridiculous, expensive, convoluted processes. What's the reason? Well, the reason is mammon. The reason is money. The reason is more extortion of the taxpayer and more deals handed out to cronies and friends of the establishment and the big club that you ain't in. And it's all done in the name of net zero. Net zero what? That is the question you've got to ask. What do they want to get to zero? Guess what? You and I will have to pay for it all through our electricity bills. Ember, the energy analyst company, estimates that the total subsidy each year will add up to £1.7 billion, £42 billion over the lifetime of the plant. Bargain. Absolute bargain. This means that to produce the same amount of electricity, more wood is going to need to be burnt. So once they add this carbon capture technology, they're actually going to need to burn even more wood to produce the same amount of electricity because of the energy requirement of this carbon capture technology. So just illogical, stupid nonsense that doesn't make any sense, but it is pushed upon us. Save Gaia, save the planet, sacrifice your quality of life, sacrifice your children and grandchildren on the altar of the Climatriarch. And how is this, and one aspect of how this illusion is created is talked about here in this section of the article, which is about 99 per hour wind. So the Met Office have been up to their tricks again. The media has been awash with claims that Storm Isha brought 99 mile per hour winds based off the Met reporting. This time the claim was based on data from Brisley Wood in Northumberland. Brisley is no ordinary wood. It's an RAF radar station at the top of an 820-foot hill, which is a highly exposed area. So this 99 mile per hour wind that they captured was up here on the top of a hill. And they do the same thing with temperatures when they say the temperatures are rising and global warming is occurring. Well, they're measuring the temperature at the side of runways where massive amounts of jet fuel and aviation fuel is being burned. It's a stupid place to do it, but that is how the illusion is created and how the narrative is pushed out. And they're doing the same thing with wind now. And they're capturing one measurement of 99 mile per hour wind, and they're saying, oh my God, the winds, we need to get more money from you. Always the answer is more money from you. Okay, what's up with that? This is a blog that I featured in the last episode and I really like, and I think it's a very incisive and even-handed treatment of climate change and the sort of science or non-science, as the case may be, behind this this effort to defraud the population and bring down living standards to something extremely low. Maybe back to the state that my grandparents enjoyed when they were here in working class England. But this article is about how 4 of Britain's top institutions have made erroneous estimates of the cost of net zero. So they don't even know how much this thing is going to cost, apart from that it's going to cost, and we have to keep ramping up the amount of money that is getting funneled into it, i.e. pissed away. 4 national institutions have failed to model the 2050 energy system correctly, and all of them in ways that lead to understatement of the costs of net zero. According to Sir Christopher, the Climate Change Committee's estimates of the costs of net zero are fundamentally flawed because they have only modelled isolated years. As he pointed out in the seminar, low wind years can happen back to back, which means that the Climate Change Committee need twice as much storage capacity as they thought. As a result, they've underestimated the costs. So, great article here with lots of quotes. The Royal Society is to be congratulated for clarifying the problem. However, it turns out that their own modelling is fundamentally flawed too. So the Royal Society can't even get it right. That's because while they model 37 years of different wind speeds, they assume that electricity demand is always the same. And these are supposed to be our best and brightest leading the way, right? This is clearly wrong because in 2050 it is imagined that we will all heat our homes with electric heat pumps. Electricity demand will therefore be much higher in cold years than in mild ones. And if we have back-to-back cold years, we are going to need much more storage. Excuse me a moment. I'm just going to take a sip. So, 4 well-funded national institutions have failed to model the 2050 correctly, and all of them in ways that lowballs the cost of net zero. That's a remarkable coincidence and one that should probably raise alarm bells about the extent of the rot in the British establishment. Yeah, another good article. So, again, it's very important to read widely and get lots of different inputs and perspectives on these very important issues, because we can't let these narratives go unchallenged and just accept them wholesale on the face of it. Because as we've seen, the mainstream media is constantly omitting and obscuring and occulting valuable aspects and information. And I think they are there just to keep people ignorant, honestly. That's what I think their purpose is at this point. Okay, so this is the dossier. This is Jordan Schachel. The World Economic Forum demands $3.5 trillion per year to decarbonize the planet, reach net zero, and restore nature. So where do they think this money's coming from? You know, when you know where money comes from, you got to look at this thing as a holistic system. You know, who makes the money, who controls the money, who gets to decide when it is created, and who where it gets sent once it's created. You got to look at these things in their entirety, the system as a whole, and have a kind of systems thinking approach to it. Otherwise, you'll never understand and make sense of any of this stuff, and you'll never be able to know whether organizations such as the World Economic Forum are good or not. Hint, hint, spoiler alert, they are not. According to a new white paper published Wednesday by the Davos outfit in partnership with McKinsey & Company, it's time to print more money to further devalue the wealth of the common man in order to pursue the apparent noble goal of decarbonization. Now, this Jordan Schachel and his work, the dossier, is way more in line with my perspective on things, because I think it's more it's higher resolution. He considers more data points, and he has a better, more rounded and he's assessment of things, and he's not being funded, you know, apart from people who want to fund him voluntarily. He's not being propped up by academic institutions, by the established sort of parasite class. He is doing this work independently because presumably he thinks it's the right thing to do. But let's have a look at what he says. The world needs up to $3.5 trillion of additional investments each year to reach net zero and restore nature. The report highlights state, adding that an organization spun up by the WEF called Giving to Amplify Earth Action, Gaia, again, with the acronyms, they're actually calling it Gaia. You know, what was I saying throughout the last episode? The climatriarch, this is the devouring mother that we are being encouraged and browbeaten and propagandized into sacrificing our lives to. The altar of the climatriarch, and here they come out and actually create some sort of organization called Gaia. It's just, you got to recognize that it's a puppet show and a pantomime, people. According to the white paper, which is creepily titled "The Role of Public-Private Philanthropic Partnerships in Driving Climate and Nature Transitions." So that title, transitions, is the key word. It's change. It's about forcing and compelling people into their new system that they've designed, right? Nothing about that white paper talks about benefiting people, talks about helping people, talks about safety, security, talks about health. No, it's all about transition. It's about how do we manipulate and psychologically nudge people to change and go over to this new system. And closing down banks and making in-person banking impossible to access is part of this, is absolutely linked to this. Drumming up crazy, ridiculous, massive amounts of public debt is key and part of this transition and manipulating you into this transition. Funneling and laundering all this money away to conflicts far away so that people can more effectively murder each other is all part of transitioning you and I into this new system that they want to put us into, which is not in our best interest. That's why they have to use all these underhand tactics, this totalitarian tiptoe, this gradualism. All has to be done covertly to manipulate you into this through this transition, and that's what we're living through. It is a transition. It is the death of an old system, the birth and the implementation of a new one, which you had no say in designing. You didn't elect Klaus Schwab. You didn't elect any of the World Economic Forum people. None of the people who occupy these philanthropic foundations, such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation. None of these people were elected, and yet they are the ones pulling the strings. You didn't choose to have the Bank of England or the Federal Reserve over in America. You didn't elect these people to run these institutions. Nope. They just elected themselves and dictated themselves to be the arbiter of finance and money and currency, and the ones who control the purse strings and get to decide who gets money and who does not get money. All of that has been done without your consent. It's a big club, and you ain't in it. Rest in peace, George Carlin. So Jordan, going on with the article, says, I can't help but point out that this is essentially the exact governmental structure of the Chinese Communist Party. So he's talking here about this white paper which says private organizations should surrender their autonomy to governments in exchange for an endless amount of credit and a backstop of protection should their business fail in the open market. And that is the exact government structure of the Chinese Communist Party, which World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, has hailed as a model for governance. Must be a major coincidence. Yes, coincidence. Are you a coincidence theorist? Maybe you are. I'm not. And there's a picture of the two men themselves. I think. Oh no, that's not Xi Jinping, is it? But it's some other guy. But they're calling themselves the new champions. So putting that $3.5 trillion in perspective, it's almost 60% of the annual US federal budget. Whoa, that's a whoppingly huge amount of dollar. And if we know anything about international public-private efforts, it seems that US taxpayers are first to get shaken down in the process. Well, that holds up, doesn't it? If we go back to the article we read at Zero Hedge about how they've just tipped $34 trillion. US taxpayers are getting, taxpayers everywhere, but it seems to be happening to the US taxpayers first. And I think the reason for that is because over there, they actually have a history of caring about individual freedom. And they have a history of trying to establish a constitution which protects that, trying to establish freedom of speech, the right to bear arms, the right to self-defense. These things are all critically important in the establishment of freedom for human beings. And so I think for that reason, this is why the US taxpayers are the first to get shaken down, as Jordan says here. 2 weeks ago, the World Economic Forum declared in another report that $13.5 trillion would be needed as soon as humanly possible to avoid climate catastrophe. Ooh, scary weather. Which also, I might say, as a side note, we have talked about here about how weather is manipulated, and governments research this, and companies research this, and they can seed clouds into the air. And Jeremy Clarkson was on the BBC showing you NASA's cloud seeding machine, and he was laughing and cheering when it started raining because of the cloud made by this giant NASA cloud creation machine. And so weather manipulation and weather modification is out there. Stratospheric aerosol injections, have a look up that, and maybe go outside and look up in the sky every now and again. See it, the lines in the sky right above your head. Who's doing it? What is it for? What is it all about? What was the website that we looked at as well? Weather Wars 101 YouTube channel is a good place to go for that. And also Geoengineering Watch is another good website to get fact up on the reality of man. Yes, there is man-made weather and man-made climate change, but it's not because you're driving a diesel car and eating steak. It's because your governments are funding scientists to find out how to do that, because it's an incredibly powerful and valuable thing to be able to do. You know, if you can flood your enemies, or if you can cause a drought, you know, in the place where your enemy grows food, that will be an incredible weapon. And we all know that military is the cause of most funding and technological advancement, and all major technologies that are advanced and created tend to get used as part of warfare. Why would this be any different? Hint, spoiler alert, it's not any different. It's exactly the same. So let us crack on. So this is a really important graph that I wanted to share and show, which is the global public-private partnership. This was a graphic made by Ian Davis, if I'm not mistaken, and I'll just get rid of myself. So you, nope, I just silenced myself and get rid of myself. That's it. So you can see this in its entirety. Now this would be a good one for those of you watching back on the replay to pause and take a screen grab, get a copy of it, because this is really showing you what the global public-private partnership is all about, and how it is structured, and where you sit in that hierarchy, and how much say and influence and impact over it you're going to have, and maybe which is zero, which is net zero. I'm just going to have a swig here. I'll give you a few seconds to cast your eyes over this and have a look and see what you think. All right, I'm back. So this is like probably one of the most important one pages you could ever be aware of or look at or see. Because have a look, what we got here is the Bank for International Settlements right at the very top there. Now we've quoted from Tragedy and Hope before about the Bank for International Settlements. That is elsewhere in my live streams. But right under there, we've got the central banks. And these are the Federal Reserve or the Bank of England. And then right underneath that, we've got the WEF, the World Economic Forum, CFR's Council on Foreign Relations. We've got the Club of Rome, Chatham House, and the Rockefellers. And these are the policy makers. This is the part of the GPP where policy originates. This is the top-down eye on top of the pyramid. These are the people and the movers and shakers who are dictating to you what quality of life you are going to have and what things you are going to be free to do or not do. So that is the structure. And then right underneath that, you've got the policy distributors. So this is the UN, the IMF, World Bank, WHO, the philanthropists who just love you and want to give away their money so that you can have a good life. And the NGOs. Okay, underneath that, you've got the national governments and the selected scientific authorities. So I think the key thing to realize here, for a lot of people to realize, is that the national governments, they're like third down the list here. This is, you know, this aligns totally with H.G. Wells' Open Conspiracy, Blueprints for a New World Order, his plan to have a scientific one world government, top down, run by technocrats and white coat elites in the name of science. Believe the science, trust the science, follow your new religion of scientism. But the government's there, third down the list. They have got a lot of people above them making decisions and creating the policy that they then have to fall in line with. And so when you're asking the question, why did my government do that? And why are they making all these insane decisions? And are they just incompetent? And maybe they're just not very good at their jobs and we just need to vote in better people. No. They are doing their jobs perfectly. That is why they have jobs, because they do what they are told by the people in the BIS, the central banks, the CFR, the WEF, the Club of Rome, Chatham House, Rockefellers, etc., etc., etc. Okay? That is what you have to realize. Now, just to the right of the national governments, you've got the selected scientific authorities. Now, these are the scientists, the scientism, white coat, lab coat, priests of the new religion who will concoct and conjure up any data or statistics or figures to back up whatever it is that the people above them want proving and backing up. And anybody who doesn't do that gets their funding cut. They get suddenly find themselves with an inability to pay their bills, to make their mortgage payments, to fund their children's education, etc., etc. They are then cut out of the process, sidelined. They are shunned In many cases, they are deplatformed, maybe even debanked, who knows. Underneath that, we've got the policy propagandists. So this is your BBC, 77th Brigade, social media platforms. This is your mainstream media newspapers, of which we looked at the start of this episode, and every episode, I might add. Then, right at the very bottom, the public. Joe Public, Jane Public, you and I, there we are, right there. So let me, what do you think? How much control and influence over all this do you have? Well, I would say it's a lot more than you think, because all you have to do, you just stop cooperating. Just do not comply. All you need to do is to just withdraw your consent, ignore these crazy, insane directives, and when a top-down diktat comes, as it did in the great scam of 2020, when the next one comes, just say no. Just say, no, thank you very much. I'm going to carry on living my life. I'm going to grow my food. I'm going to teach my children. I'm going to educate them. I'm going to play some board games, make some music, spend time with the people I love, and I will not be a slave to a system which is designed to ruin everything for the most amount of people, apart from that small parasite class sitting at the very top, sucking the lifeblood and the currency and the energy out of the rest of us. So that, my friends, is an incredibly important image right there. And I got to credit Ian Davis for that. So what do you think? Hope that was useful. Let's move on with the show. What do we got next? Okay, so yeah, we just had a look at this, and we've got, we got the Bank for International Settlements right here at the very top. So let's do a bit of learning and find out what the Bank for International Settlements is. It's the BIS. It's an international financial institution which is owned by member central banks. Its primary goal is to foster international monetary and financial cooperation while serving as a bank for central banks. So it is the central bank of central banks. And we all know that central banks are evil. So what do you think the central bank of the central banks is? Well, it's the spider at the center of the web, isn't it? It is the apex predator of all apex predators. Established in 1929, its initial purpose was to oversee the settlement of World War I reparations. So, bit of history. We're going back 100 years here, 100 years. Now, crucially and interestingly, in the background section, it says, an early case, so the international monetary cooperation started to develop tentatively in the course of the 19th century. An early case was a £400,000 loan in gold coins from the Bank of France to the Bank of England, which was facing a bank run, made in 1825 and facilitated by the Rothschilds. There they are, mentioned right here, admitted up front on Wikipedia, the most mainstream of mainstream. This is the authorized history, don't forget. This is the official line. This is the nothing to see here, and this is what they admit to. This is not including the stuff that is hidden and occulted from you. But here they say it all goes back to the Rothschilds facilitating a loan between France and the Bank of England. Interesting, isn't it? Want to know more about the Rothschilds? I recently did a live reading of The Romance of the Rothschilds, which is a 1913 book laying out their history, right here on this channel. I did all 7 chapters, so you can get the background of this family. That is by no means a one-stop shop for information on this family. It read to me, and I think a lot of my viewers agreed in the discussions, that it was a bit of a puff piece. It was kind of bigging them up and making them out to be superhuman, incredible, philanthropic, wonderful people. That is not the case. They've got they're the spider, at the center of the web, I think, in many cases. But just interesting to see them mentioned here. And so knowing about this Bank for International Settlements and its history, which is quite detailed here, as you can see, got a lot of information going on. Good bit of reading there. Membership. So this is the BIS members are central banks of 63 jurisdictions. Now, what you got to recognize here is that the banks that are not part of this system, there's not many countries that don't have a central bank that's part of this system. And there's an interesting correlation between the countries which do not have central banks part of the system and how they are portrayed in our media. I'll give you a bit of a spoiler alert there. They're usually pretty much always portrayed as bad guys whom we need to invade. Isn't that a coincidence? What a strange correlation. Correlation is not causation, however. And so, moving on, not that fast, we got the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. So this is another very closely linked to the BIS, but it's a little bit further down. It's a policy distributor, IMF. So the BIS is at the top here, and then we come down here to the IMF on this list. On this diagram. The International Monetary Fund is a major financial agency in the United Nations, the UN, and an international financial institution funded by 190 member countries with headquarters in Washington, D.C. So again, another interesting and important institution to be aware of. What I thought was quite telling is one part of its function is surveillance of the global economy. The IMF is mandated to oversee the international monetary and financial system and monitor the economic and financial policies of its member countries. This activity is known as surveillance and facilitates international cooperation. So it facilitates ostensibly international cooperation, but I would say rather than cooperation, it's more like facilitating international consolidation, because it is these organizations and these groups that are trying to consolidate everything and turn everything in the globe on the face of the earth into their one system. They're trying to transition us into that system, and they're using ridiculous policies such as net zero, ridiculous funding of defense, and all these different mechanisms and methods in order to rip people off, funnel that money out, impoverish people so that they have no option but to accept this new system when it is eventually offered to us and rolled out. That is going to be the solution to the reaction that we give to the problem that they created. All right, so another bit of learning for you to do. We've got the Corbett report on his sexy new revamped website with his 2014 documentary, Century of Enslavement, the History of the Federal Reserve. So we'll just go back quickly to our diagram. Where's the Federal Reserve on here? That's going to be... Where's the Federal Reserve on here? Central banks here. So the central banks, so we got the BIS at the very top, and they coordinate the central banks, and the Federal Reserve is the Central Bank of America, right? So if you want to learn about how the Federal Reserve has enslaved your country, if you're from America, or if you're not from America, then the country that has the best history of creating and building freedom in the world, that is America. That is its history, and that was its purpose when it was founded, was to create freedom for the common man, who were all men and women who were all seen as equal, and that was taken as self-evident. If you want to see how this country was co-opted and taken over and brought to heel by these financial predatory parasites, that is a wonderful documentary. I can't remember how long it is. I'm not going to play a clip for you now. I'm going to link to it underneath the video, but you could definitely learn a lot. The transcript's right here. If you want to read along, or just read it, if you prefer reading, you could do that instead. Okay, so this is Kit Knightley, and we're now looking at a story from Off Guardian from December. IMF head wants worldwide carbon taxes. Okay, so I'm going to go back again. In case I haven't hammered it home enough. And here we are again with the IMF. They are the policy distributors, do not forget. So they're responsible for pushing out this policy of carbon taxes, which is coming top down from the Bank for International Settlements, because this is how they want to control and regulate the world's markets, the world's people. The activity of everybody in the world is what they want to regulate. Apart from that tiny class of wealthy, ridiculous parasite people, they don't get regulated in the same way we do. But it doesn't matter if they are anyway, because they're wealthy enough to just pay the taxes and it doesn't affect them. But this is the IMF chief, Kristalina Georgieva, has called for every government to implement some form of carbon taxes or carbon pricing in the near future. All right. So when you put a price on carbon, she says, decarbonization accelerates. And decarbonization is just code word for deindustrialization. In some places now, they've actually come out and started arguing for degrowth, and they're saying we need degrowth. We need to deindustrialize. We need to break apart and dismantle our way of life and the things we enjoy and the systems and the structures and that we inhabit and that we use and that we rely on and we depend upon. That is degrowth, that is deindustrialization. But the code word for that in this day and age is decarbonization. So whenever you see that word, what you got to hear in your mind is degrowth and deindustrialization, okay? When you put a price on carbon, decarbonization accelerates. And again, they always conflate carbon with carbon dioxide. Right? She's talking about carbon dioxide, but she's saying carbon. It's a totally different thing. Price on carbon. We are carbon-based life forms, right? If you put a price on carbon, you're putting a price on the very thing, the most central, key, important, critically necessary component of our existence, carbon. When you put a price on carbon, decarbonization, not decarbon dioxidization, not when you put a price on carbon dioxide. When you put a price, this should say, when you put a price on carbon dioxide, decarbon dioxidization accelerates. But that's not what it says, is it? And they're banking on people not raising that point, not asking that question. They're banking on people reading this, hearing this, and going, oh yeah, she's talking about carbon dioxide. It's like, if she was talking about carbon dioxide, wouldn't she say that? The Europeans introduced the emission trading scheme in 2005, and they have been growing, and yet emissions went down by 37%. You see the same thing in Canada with their carbon tax. While both the speech and interview discussed the proposed carbon taxes in terms of corporations as major polluters, any tax applied to big business would be directly passed on to private citizens via price increase. Obviously, again and again, this is always the case, isn't it? The truth is, economic destruction, designed to lower the standard of living for ordinary people, is the whole point of carbon taxes, just as it was the point of lockdowns. Yes, well said. A global version of those rules is likely just one of many such measures which we can expect moving forward since, according to Georgieva, the world's biggest financial institutions are all working together on this issue. The IMF, World Bank, OECD, and World Trade Organization have set up a task force to examine the different carbon prices that are implied in countries around the world by their carbon policies and regulations. The head of the IMF has spoken, and the World Bank and World Trade Organization are on board. Carbon taxes are inevitable. The only question is what they decide to call them. All the world's biggest financial heavy hitters are coming together to figure out the best way to scam people out of their hard-earned money for the good of the planet, obviously. Excellent article there, investigative journalism at its best off Guardian. I would wholeheartedly encourage people to consider donating some amount, £1 even a month. What's that? What's £1 a month? Okay, Spiked is reporting that people are revolting against woke capitalism. In 2023, ordinary people gave a two-fingered salute to corporate virtue signaling. So this is a kind of callback and a reflection on the Bud Light travesty who hired a TikTok influencer and woman impersonator Dylan Mulvaney. And then immediately their sales dropped by 17%. And it was no longer the best-selling beer in the US, which it had been for 20 years. It wasn't just Bud Light. The same thing happened to Victoria's Secret. They had a major woke rebrand, and then they lost £1 billion. So the point of this article is to just say that people don't want this woke stuff thrust down their throats at every opportunity when they're trying to do some shopping and buy things, and it is pretty it's kind of a bit of good news. It's nice that the tide is sort of turning a little bit, but it highlights the point that you've got to vote with your money and your pounds and your dollars, right? The money, where you spend your money, the votes you make with your money are more important than the votes you make in the ballot box by a long shot. So choosing where to spend your money and who to support, do you give it to the BBC or do you give it to HEYS Reviews? I would do this even if nobody was paying me, which nobody does. But it's about asking these kind of questions, right? It's about kind of where can my money best be spent? Can I buy meat or vegetable or food from organic local producers near me? Maybe there's allotments. Maybe there's people growing in their gardens. Maybe you can have the true from the earth organic stuff that your body craves and needs in order to be nutritionally fulfilled. Or you can go down to the major mainline supermarkets and you can get their poisonous products, which are full of GMOs and pesticides and fungicides and herbicides and rodenticides. And you can have all that instead. You know, it's up to you, but it comes down to where you put your money. And we're kind of in a window now where if we don't really vote with our money in order to support ethical companies, to support people who put out good information, like such as Off Guardian, content creators, etc. If we don't support them, they're going to disappear, and then we're just going to be left with the mainstream, top-down, approved narrative with nobody being able to speak truth to power. And this is actually the plan as laid out by Bertrand Russell in his book Has Man a Future, as laid out by H.G. Wells. As well in The Open Conspiracy. They do talk about how, you know, we need to have the open discussion of ideas, but at the same time we also need to have a monopoly on force to make sure nobody can overthrow or challenge the one world government. And so the window's closing to support good companies and ethical businesses, and the window is also closing to start up your own good ethical business and company, right? So that's another thing to bear in mind. I think we're going to skip through that one. We're going to skip through this one because I'm kind of closing in on my window that I can speak. And I did pack, I think, 40 tabs into this episode, so I'm not quite sure how far along we are now, but I think we're getting toward the end. But this is a Mises Institute article that I thought was very, very good because it's got some good, true, realistic, believable, backed up, verifiable history, and that is really what we need to understand what's going on in the world and why things are the way they are. So this is America's Fiat Money Gestapo, the Untold History of the Secret Service. This is the kind of article that I really love because it made me want to go out and buy some books on the topic and learn more. And I was like, oh, I want to know more about this. This is a really interesting story. So he says, this is Joshua D. Glawson. There is an untold story in American monetary history. Some are reluctant even to discuss it. I'm referring to the U.S. Secret Service's very own role in the destruction of sound money in America. As constitutional sound money in the form of physical gold and silver coins, whether minted privately or not, became an annoying impediment to expanding the size and power of the federal government, central planners began circulating unbacked paper proxies and formed a Gestapo-like police agency to enforce the scheme. So, unbacked paper proxies. That is what we have. So when we say money in this day and age, we're not talking about money, actually. Not real money, not nature's money, God's money, the money provided to us by the Creator. We're talking about unbacked paper proxies. These things can be printed, they're made out of thin air, they come from nowhere, and they have no value whatsoever apart from the value that people believe they have. So it's a belief, it's a faith-based thing. And they come in useful, of course, because we all believe that they're useful and that they have value. But the point here is that you can use whatever people believe is valuable can be used for money. Okay? It doesn't have to be the picture of the current monarch or the Enlightenment scientist that is stuck to our plastic fiat currency. These are unbacked paper proxies. Unbacked as in they're not backed by anything that has any kind of value, like traditionally, or any sort of intrinsic value, if you believe in intrinsic value, which some people don't. But it's about it's just a really good phrase to bear in mind if you're chasing money, if you're stacking it up, if you're hoarding it, if your life is largely revolved around chasing these things, that they are unbacked paper proxies, and real wealth consists of other things. Some things that cannot be bought with money, some that can, such as land, property, precious metals, water filters, things that allow human beings to access the basic necessities of life, right? I would say these are valuable and really wealth. But what is interesting here is that there was a time when sound money was gold and silver in the US, and then there was a whole movement and history around getting the population to stop using these coins and start using unbacked paper proxies that were printed solely by the Federal Reserve, the central bank of that country. And this was a very fascinating transition and a very similar, a good example of what's happening to us now. When I highlighted the word transition earlier, we're being transitioned into the new system. This is exactly what happened here. Getting Americans to stop, to not be able to use physical gold and silver coins, and to coerce them into using these unbacked paper proxies. And I'm sure at the time, it was spun as, well, people are just choosing to use these unbacked paper proxies instead of carrying around the gold and silver because people find it more convenient. People don't like to carry all that heavy gold and that heavy cumbersome silver, and it's they're choosing to do it, and we're just facilitating their choice. But yeah, all right, okay, read on to find out if that was the case. During the Civil War, both sides issued their own banknotes to help fund the respective war efforts, often unbacked by the two monetary metals. So that I didn't know that. That was interesting. So the Civil War, both sides of the Civil War had their own banknotes, and neither of them were backed up by actual monetary metals. The number of fiat dollars in a bank and region in the new era would be largely based on population rather than gold and silver reserves, which is one reason the Union continued to encourage immigration, both for fiat and monetary support and war efforts. So a link here between immigration and fiat money. Which I think is also interesting and worth exploring, and kind of looking at today's events through that lens to see if there is any kind of link between our current fiat system, monetary system, and immigration. Since the Union and Congress sought to impose a federal fiat legal tender currency system that did not rely on tangible value and voluntarism, they needed enforcement of those laws. Those supporting laws included income taxes and establishing the IRS. Yep. So you have to build this system of unbacked paper proxies, and then you have to build in a load of laws, man-made laws, that force people and punish people, force people to use these and punish people if they do not. And then you build in your tax system where you say, well, you have to pay us taxes, and the only form of currency we accept are the unbacked paper proxies made by the Federal Reserve. And you have got people by the short and curlies. So that is another excellent article with some really good history and another fantastic jumping off point, which I think for further research, learning, and exploration. So the Brownstone Institute now, with the Great Taking exposing the financial endgame. I've mentioned the Great Taking before. I think it was on my episode, Take IT to the Bank, which was, 10 episodes back, something like that. But The Great Taking, if you haven't heard of it, is a book and now a documentary. I don't know how long it will stay on YouTube, so get over there and have a look at it. It's just The Great Taking documentary. You can watch that. But the book is also free. You can download that from thegreattaking.com. And it's written by David Webb. And here's the introduction in his own words. What is this book about? It is about the taking of collateral, all of it, the end game of this globally synchronous debt accumulation super cycle. This is being executed by long-planned intelligent design, the audacity and scope of which is difficult for the mind to encompass. Included are all financial assets, all money on deposit at banks, all stocks and bonds, and hence all underlying property of all public corporations, including all inventories, plant and equipment, land, mineral deposits, inventions, and intellectual property. Privately owned personal and real property financed with any amount of debt will be similarly taken, as will the assets of privately owned businesses, which have been financed with debt. If even partially successful, this will be the greatest conquest and subjugation in world history. We are now living within a hybrid war conducted almost entirely by deception and thus designed to achieve war aims with little energy input. It is a war of conquest directed not against other nation states, but against all of humanity. Incredibly important book, and very good to see it getting more coverage, which it has been doing recently. And now, quick shout out to Parallel Mike of Parallel Systems Broadcast, because he was the first one to recognize the significance of this book. And David Rogers Webb has been interviewed by Mike since then. But good to see Brownstone Institute kind of getting onto this and talking about it and getting it out there. That was from last month, but very critical part of the puzzle, which explains why the financial system is the way it is and how it's not broken. A lot of people, they want to say, oh, the system's broken and we just need to fix it. We just need to vote the right people and put them in charge and then they will be able to fix it. No, that is not the case. The case is actually more like the system is perfect and it is designed and is working perfectly. That is very critical to bear in mind. Okay, so we'll go back over to the articles here. So now we're into the resources section, my favorite section of the episode, where I get to tell you and show you further avenues for learning. And this is something that I found recently, and this is John Hamer, and he has a couple of books. He has a lot of books. Actually, not just a couple of books. He has lots of books. But these books are two that I wanted to put on your radar, which is Behind the Curtain, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Okay? So he's done a whole bunch of books, and he's a British author, and he writes on a whole manner of topics, really deeply well-researched books. And these two, well, this one's 568 pages, and I think this one's something similar. Yeah, so it's 1,000 pages altogether. And it's a chilling expose of the banking industry. Now, one thing that was very interesting to me that I heard in the videos that I will talk about in a moment, John explained how back in December 1968, and this whole story is written here on the Amazon page, so have a look at this. Back in 1968, there was a landmark court case where which was Montgomery versus Daly. Jerome Daly was a lawyer, and he defended himself against the bank's attempted foreclosure on his mortgage on the grounds that there was no consideration for the loan. This consideration in legalese refers to the item exchange and is an essential element in a legal contract. Daly contended that the bank offered no consideration for his loan on the grounds that they had created the money out of thin air by bookkeeping entry and had therefore not suffered a loss. The proceedings were recorded by Justice William Drexler, and in the end, Justice William Drexler ruled in favor of Jerome Daly. He said, "It sounds exactly like fraud to me." Oh, sorry, that wasn't Drexler actually said that. That was Martin Mahoney. But basically, this chap, Jerome Daly, was successful in getting his mortgage overturned on the grounds that the bank creates money out of thin air. So this sets a very important precedent in law, and this was in America. Interestingly, in the video, as John goes on to explain, that this presiding judge, Martin Mahoney, didn't live for too much longer after this decision was made. And it says, since this precedent, many other defendants have attempted to have mortgages and loans nullified using the same defense as Daly, but there's been extremely limited success. In fact, one judge said, strictly off the record, "If I let you do that, you and everyone else, it would bring the whole banking system down. I cannot let you go behind the bar of the bank. We are not going behind that curtain." And that is why the book is called Behind the Curtain. So these two books, I haven't read them, but I definitely will grab them and read them at some point. But here, to help you decide whether or not you'd like to invest in a copy, you can listen to John on his BitChute channel, because he's been banned from YouTube, obviously, for telling too much truth. But here he describes the effort and energy that went into the book and why he wrote it, and kind of more detail about what it's all about. And it's really a history. It's really very much getting into families such as the Rothschilds and this fraudulent nature of the fiat system and the monopoly that has been kind of forced upon us. And there it is, right for sale there for, what, 50 quid? You can get those two volumes, and you can learn all about the history of this Mammon, of the parasite class, and the mechanisms and the structures that they use against us. Now, here's back to Ian Davis, a couple of very good resources for you. This article is Happy New Year via the Paradox of Banknotes. And really it's all about this rollout of central bank digital currencies and how people are kind of pushing back by using banknotes and cash, and the importance of using cash. And despite government's attempt to get rid of cash, people are increasing their use of it. In this case, it really is a situation, use it or lose it. And if we lose it, people are going to miss it deeply and profoundly once it's gone. I guarantee that to you, honestly. that is going to be the case, because once it's gone, all that's going to be left is a programmable currency that can be switched on and switched off remotely, depending on what you do. And if you say the wrong thing, go the wrong place, associate with the wrong people, then they can just switch your money off. And how does that sound? That doesn't sound very good, does it? So, very excellent article and blog post here from Ian Davis explaining this paradox. And talking about the surging demand for cash, which happened during the pseudo-pandemic. And as I mentioned before, Ian Davis has this book, Pseudo-Pandemic, and you can get that for free by signing up to his email list. Excellent book, very detailed and well-referenced and researched, and it was written as the whole thing was happening, and so it's a wonderful account of those days, which are now kind of so distant in our memories and so few people like to talk about and reflect back upon, because if they did, they would realize that the whole thing was nonsense and didn't make any sense, and they went along with a complete scam. But, you know, people don't like to be told that they've been fooled. It's easier to fool them than convince them they've been fooled. And I get that. But we all have to be compassionate and kind and you know, face the truth of what actually happened during that time, which, you know, we went through a portal into a new world where scams can be rolled out globally. And that is critically important. And we have to, now more than ever, be vigilant and on guard and wary of what the next global scam that gets rolled out might be. Because there's a lot of contenders. Some people think aliens. Some people think World War III. Some people think climate change. You know, could be one, all, or any of the above. But Ian Davis is, again, doing fearless, intrepid, actual investigative journalism, the kind of stuff that you should be getting in your mainstream newspapers, but you never will, because their purpose is not to inform and empower. Their purpose is to deceive and occult useful, valuable information. So you got to do some reading, you know, get a cup of tea, sit down, and actually pay attention for longer than 8 seconds, and you might actually find out some good stuff. And while you're at it, you could throw Ian a few dollars as well. Support him before he is unable to continue doing this fantastic work. All right, so before we get onto that bit, we are pretty much at the end stage of the show. But I have a few final things to give you and get on your radar before we wrap it up. Over to the book cam. And so I grabbed a few books off my shelves, which I thought would be worth telling you about in order to help people and who want to learn more about this situation. This is My Money, Mammon, I. And I kind of picked that title because it was a homonym being words that have the same sound but different spelling, you know, such as there and there. The one that many people online seem to be unable to get right. Where are they? Oh, they're there. They are there. Right. These are homonyms, words that sound the same but have a different spelling and different meaning. And I called it My Money, and then I called it Mammon, I. And Mammon is the biblical word which is often thought to refer to the greed and wealth acquisition and a obsession with money and acquiring money and gaining it and putting that above all else, above being a good person, above helping others, above being charitable, for example. And Mammon, and then Mammon I, you know, the I being a reference to this sort of one world government, the eye of the pyramid, the New World Order, this symbolism on the back, literally on the back of the dollar bill is a pyramid with an eye at the top of it. And it sounds the same. My money, Mammon I. My money, my money. And actually the word money itself is interesting because if you sort of split it up, you've got mon, M-O-N, which means one, you know, in the case of like monorail. You've got mon, one, and then E-Y, I, one eye, money, one eye. So very interesting terminology and the language of money as well is very fascinating to look at because it's so very closely linked with maritime language, right? So you've got banks, the banks of the river, and you've got the current of the sea and the currency, right? You've got the flow of cash, all these different things. So it's very closely linked, and you've got to look at the words and these things that are being used, just as we have done with some of the articles today. So that's why I called it this. That's why I gave it the title that I did, in case you hadn't figured that out. And sorry if you did know that and that was blinding obvious and I've just explained something to you like teaching you to suck an egg. But for the benefit of the maybe one person out there who didn't know that and figure that out, then hopefully that helped. That explanation helped. But anyway, over to the book cam. So books that I think are worth reading about and learning from in order to get a good grip on this whole situation that we're in. Top of the pile is The New Confessions of an Economic Hitman, How America Really Took Over the World by John Perkins. New York Times bestseller, updated and expanded. So this is a gentleman, John Perkins. He's a whistleblower. And this is the corrupt world of economic hitmen, coercing poor countries into accepting huge development loans so they are forever in debt to United States organizations. So this is all about international corporations, international banking. This is all about how that system is rolled out and used to control and enslave and make sure people can't get out from under this massive pile of debt, which is really the critical thing for all of this. So he's part of that, and that was his job, and that's what he did. But he's not doing it anymore. He's now telling you all about it and revealing it in a book. And I found this book at the back of my local church, which was a pretty good find because the rest of the books at the back of that church are not very good. Next recommendation is Dishonest Money by Joseph Plummer. Joseph Plummer has done some really good work because he writes very short, sharp, and kind of to-the-point books, which not too much of a time commitment to read, 200 pages or so. And in this one, he gives you the kind of whistle-stop tour on the history of banking with a focus on, the Federal Reserve because he himself is American. And the premise of this book is simple. Very smart and powerful people have created a system of financial control, and with it, they are robbing us of our wealth, freedom, and future. So that's another one. It's very punchy and very easy to understand. And I went through this, made lots of notes, and found that there are some wonderful quotes in here. And this is a book that I think he gives away for free. There's an audiobook on his channel, Joseph Plummer. He also has a summary, which is very good, of Tragedy and Hope, which is called Tragedy and Hope 101. And so, wonderful author, excellent resource, good place to get learned. Next, the IMF and the Debt Crisis, a guide to the third world's dilemmas. So this one I picked up for $2.99 in an Oxfam, and I just grabbed it because I knew that the IMF was kind of involved in this situation of sort of financial slavery and debt-based cyclical boom-bust crashes and exploitations of the world's people. So I got in here, and this book actually, and turns out it's from 1984, but this was translated into English in 1986, which is a fantastic year. I think this is the second impression from 1987. Here, all about how the IMF is involved in perpetuating this dishonest money cycle that Joseph Plummer talks about and that John Perkins talks about, how it is used to get countries into debt, keep them forever under the cosh of crippling interest repayments. And this was an excellent book to have on your shelf and to do some learning about the IMF, that level of the global public-private partnership. What was the IMF? The third one down? I think it was the third one down. Was it Policy Enforcer? Not Policy Enforcer. Policy Enforcer. Okay. Next, A History of Central Banking and the Enslavement of Mankind. Stephen Mitford Goodson. So this book is banned on Amazon now. You can't buy this on Amazon anymore. I don't actually know where you can buy it. I found it in a shop in Exeter, and it was just sitting there. And in fact, I was able, the shop that I got it in said it's a name your own price. So you just pick the books that you want, and then you just give them a price. So I got this for, I don't know, £2 or £3 or something. I didn't even realize that it was banned and out of print. But another excellent tour de force of the history of banking. And so let's have a brief look there at some of the contents. So you've got how usury destroyed the Roman Empire. You've got Julius Caesar, the Gold Age. So it's going really back. Role of church in the decline and fall. The hidden origins of the Bank of England, ancient England, the glorious Middle Ages. Establishment of the Bank of England, war and debt, slavery in perpetuity. So it's got a history, and it's been going back, and it's a tale as old as time. It is the main way that people have been controlled and coerced and ripped off and exploited and enslaved for a very, very, very long time. Finally, the last book that I want to get on your radar is this Lost Science of Money by Stephen Zarlenger. So this is The Mythology of Money, the Story of Power. This book was recommended to me by Richard Grove of Grand Theft World podcast and AUTONOMY Course of Action. And I did have to hunt kind of far and wide to find this. It's kind of a hefty tome. And interestingly, and this is just unplanned but coincidental, this gentleman, Stephen Zarlenger, and you're like, why has he got the Carroll Quigley book? Well, I've got it because Stephen Zarlenger is the publisher for this Carroll Quigley book, The Anglo-American Establishment. And he has done a publisher's note from January the 8th, 1981 there. And Stephen A. Zarlenger, there he is. And I didn't know that until I opened this book here. And I was like, I know that name. But he did a book, The Lost Science of Money. And this is apparently one of the best. I haven't read this one yet, so full disclosure. But this is one of the best full histories of money, going back to, all the different kinds of money. We've got the origin of monetary systems, Rome's decline from a monetary view, reinstituting money in the West, Byzantium, Renaissance struggles. So all the way through up to Germany's hyperinflation under a private central bank, the international monetary organizations, the European Monetary Union, and proposals for U.S. monetary reform. So solutions, crucially, Stephen Zarlenger is giving us the history, explaining the problem, and then saying, let's reform things in this way. And I don't know, I guess these reformations haven't been carried out, judging by the 34 trillion debt of the article that we just read. But Stephen Zarlenger put this book out 2002. And this is what you find, actually, when you start reading books and you start getting into books and reading widely and trying to really get up to speed with what's going on in the world and how the world works. What you find is all the solutions are all out there. The solutions to all the world's problems, all the issues exist. And that is the staggering thing. That is the real paradigm shifting realization. Two things. One, the system is working perfectly. The system is working exactly as it was designed. It's not broken. It's not going wrong. It doesn't need fixing. It is working the way it's been designed to work. The outcomes we're getting are exactly correct. System is perfect. It's exactly it's functional, right? So that's the first thing you got to realize. The second thing you got to realize is that the solutions to it and the systems which would get a better outcome, which would get an outcome that is more fair, more just, which creates more freedom, which helps people to be healthy, to be satisfied, to have good lives. Those systems and solutions already exist as well, right? It's not a case of nobody knows what would work. Nobody knows. Nobody has any, people know the knowledge of what would work and the way we could have things so that most people could enjoy the maximum amount of freedom. That is known. That knowledge is out there, but it's hidden and it's occulted, and people are distracted from discovering it by, name any distraction you can think of: sports, soap operas, mainstream news, BBC propaganda, but all these mind control techniques, Netflix, internet, social media, TikTok, etc., 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 etc. People's willpower is just decimated, and their interest in getting involved in these kind of discussions, what is going on in the world, how can we fix it, what are the solutions, what are the better ways we could do things, all that is just ripped apart and decimated as well. And so, but the answers are out there, and the information and the knowledge is out there, and the best place to find that is in books, as I'm sure you've heard me say many, many times. And that's why it's important to stock up on books, preserve them, learn from them, and teach others the things you learn in them. And that's why I try and highlight books for you to read and get on your radar, and so you can do the same. Put your own voice out there, create your own YouTube channel, and we can kind of create a network of people who are learning from the best books in order to get the knowledge and the information and the solutions out there to as many people as we can. Fuel more better decision making, more moral behavior, And ultimately, that's just going to improve things for everybody on aggregate, because a main cause of the problems that we're kind of into at the minute that is preventing us from having a better quality of life, that is resulting in so many of us losing so many of our freedoms, is because people are on the whole immoral, and they don't know right from wrong, and they don't know what is and isn't in line with the natural law of this place where we live, and the rules that govern the physical and the spiritual reality that we inhabit. And so getting a grip on those and changing your thoughts, your emotion in actions so that they are all aligned and in line with natural law is a very key part of the solution here. And so that is why we try and learn, we try and gain some knowledge, and we try and grow up, put our big boy pants on, take some responsibility on our shoulders for ourselves, and recognize that we have a lot of potential. We have a crazy, and every single one of us has an immense amount of potential. And you owe it to not only yourself, but to everyone around you and to future generations of people to strive and toil and reach for the fulfillment of that potential in whatever way you can. Right. And you're never going to look back on your life and be like, oh, you know what? I'm so glad I didn't fulfill my potential. Like, it's just not going to happen. Okay. You are going to look back on your life and go, do you know what? I'm really glad I put the work in, and I pushed myself out of my comfort zone, and I fulfilled some of my potential, and I tried to do that hard thing, and I learned, and I grew up, and I got more mature, and I gained the wisdom. You know, you are going to look back on these and have these kind of realizations. You're never going to look back and be like, oh, I'm so glad that I just remained average my entire life. Yeah, that was a really good decision that I made there. I don't know, you might do, but I find it hard to believe that somebody would on their deathbed be like, oh, I'm so glad that I never tried hard or to do anything hard and just was average my whole life. So I don't know. I could be wrong about that, but anyway. Finally, we are in the home stretch. And what I wanted to do, and I don't know how long this is going to take because it's quite a long article, but I wanted to read through this, The Parasite Class by Ian Davis. And because this is what I've been talking about. I did a whole episode called The Sinecure Class. I did about this. And actually, just before we get to that, I should also mention as well that, you know, if you want to help me do more of these, then you can do that by looking in the links below this video. There's a buy me a coffee, which is a lovely way to just throw me a few pounds that I can then invest in books or replacement webcams, because this one packed in last week and this new one is here now, or just ways to make the show better, or that's wonderful. That's really helpful, and that would be greatly appreciated. There's also Instagram and Telegram links where you can follow me and get in touch with me and give me suggestions and feedback and recommendations. I've had so many good recommendations from viewers sending me books, articles, documentaries, interviews, clips, quotes. That's what it's all about. That just warms my heart. So you can get involved. Telegram and Instagram, great way to do that. Like, comment, share, subscribe, all the usual stuff there. And then the other thing beyond that is underneath, after the video goes live, I will publish my affiliate links for the Autonomy course, which is Richard Grove, who's been doing the kind of work that I'm doing, only to a much greater standard for much longer, maybe 15 years or so. He has an incredible story, and he's now teaching autonomy, and that is the you know, it's a one word. That word in and of itself tells you what you're going to get. If you don't have enough autonomy in your life, if you are feeling trapped, if you're feeling like you don't have options, you don't have career options, you don't know ways to make money, to be self-sufficient, you don't know how to learn or what to learn, you don't know who to work with or how or where to learn the skills or what skills to learn, if you've got all these big question marks, and yet you also have a sort of sense that you are capable of more and better things, then autonomy could be the right course for you and the right community for you. And Richard could be the right teacher for you. I surely have to say, hand on heart, I wouldn't be sitting here doing what I'm doing now if it was not for learning and being mentored by the great Richard Grove, who has an incredible amount of life experience, knowledge, expertise, wisdom, and intuitive grace to guide his students along tirelessly. And he makes it look so easy, but I know what he does. He shows up day in, day out, delivering lectures, answering questions, and really just putting it all out there for people to benefit from, to lift up people's awareness and knowledge and self-confidence in their own unlimited, potentially, possibly, basically unlimited potential. That's what I was trying to say. He's really a man who is just living in service to others. And the Autonomy course is full of people like that. So if all that sounds good, you can explore the links underneath this video and learn about the Autonomy course. It's a 12-week course, but 12-week is really, that's just boot camp. That's just the 12-week course is really just the kind of like, okay, here you're going to learn the basics. And then, then it gets real after that first 12 weeks. That's when the good stuff really starts happening. But anyway, if you're interested in that, that sounds good to you, I am an affiliate of the course, so you can explore those links. And if you go through the whole process and you sign up and you decide it's right for you and you want to get involved, then I will get a little cut of that action. But, me getting a cut of that action aside, consider it and look at it. If you have any sense of frustration because you've got ideas, you just don't know how to get them off the ground, or how to implement the behavioral changes or the psychological changes, or you want to learn more about what's going on in the world, why things are the way they are, then this is just the best place to do it, I think, to my mind. So that is how you can support me if you want to do so. But just being here, that is the main way. Just being here and sharing this and talking about it to other people, and that is it. And that is what I am truly and honestly very deeply grateful for. So thank you for being here. Okay, so the final thing we're going to do today, and this is going to go on for a little bit longer, as long as it takes to read this, is a read through of the Parasite class. And then I'm not going to be able to do another one of these for about 3 weeks' time, which is why I wanted to make this a good one, jam-packed full of good stuff. So it's going to be 3 weeks until I do another long-form HEYS Reviews Lives episode, but we might be able to get some reading done before then, so watch this space. But this is the Parasites class by Ian Davis, read by Nick of HEYS Reviews. I will make myself disappear and I will just read this through for you now, and then we will close out the live stream at the end of it. So, hope you enjoy. The Parasite class by Ian Davis. I am such a bloody hypocrite. I go on about the othering of people, decrying the accusatory objectivization of social groups. I deplore the fascistic blame game, so often used to divert attention from the real issue or problem. I rail against the divisions, deliberately created to divide and rule us, and then I go and call the billionaire oligarchs and their political, academic, and scientific establishment the parasite class. What a numpty. As pointed out by one of my funniest and most constructive critics, it looks like I'm projecting. I am guilty of othering. I blame and objectify a social group for the ills of the world. I have perched myself arrogantly on my own ridiculous moral podium, he warns. I fear he may be right. So, being an arrogant, moralizing hypocrite, I have explored my logic and have concluded that I was right after all. Although I would, wouldn't I? Nonetheless, oligarchs are the parasite class. Let me explain. Introducing elite theory. The common term we are given to refer to these bastards, I use the term both inaccurately and advisedly, is the elite. If that isn't social engineering, I don't know what is. This all stems from elite theory, a branch of political science that sprang up in the late 19th and early 20th century. Elite theory tries to explain why society is divided between the broad mass of the people and a ruling minority who always hold power. Elite theory supposedly provides a scientific rationale to explain why, no matter where or when we look, a tiny clique controls nearly all the resources and possesses overwhelming financial, economic, and political authority, which they then use to rule. Sometimes acknowledged and understood by the public, and sometimes not. Broadly speaking, elite theory has rehashed ideas that are thousands of years old, without discovering anything new at all, although it often reinforces many of the canards we are expected to swallow. It reveals that all the forms of government are essentially oligarchies. A current internet search on the term oligarchy will repeatedly try to convince you that oligarchy relates specifically to Russia. This is complete rubbish. An oligarch is someone who has amassed immense wealth and converted it into political authority. That is what an oligarch has always been. ever since humanity started calling them oligarchs. Russia is an oligarchy, but, as revealed by almost all elite theory, and the thousands of years of political philosophy, science, and history it reiterates, so is every other nation-state. In elite theory, the word elite is a polysemic term that can mean aristocracy in the classical sense. It comes from the French aristocratie, meaning government by those who are the best citizens. This is derived from the Greek aristokratia, meaning government or rule of the best. In order to avoid eulogizing oligarchs too much, elite is used by others to denote a ruling class, absent the aristokratia inference. The etymology of the word elite is formed from the French elite, meaning pick out, choose, derived from the Latin eligere, meaning choose. Elite theory alternately perceives the elite as the best among us who lead by merit or as the ruling or political class we sometimes choose. The political class interpretation stems from the work of Gaetano Mosca, who noted that oligarchs often gained power using coercion and violence, but were particularly well organized and thus, with control of nearly all resources, ruled. Either way, there is a suggestion that oligarchs benefit from some kind of meritocracy. Use of meritocracy can be traced back to Plato, more on him shortly, and is now used to denote, according to the OED, a ruling or influential class of educated or able people, or government or the holding of power by people selected according to merit. The oligarch is either the best among us or powerful and part of a well-organized clique, according to elite theorists. In modern use, the word meritocracy was popularized by the sociologist Michael Dunlop Young. He used it as an ironic spoof, warning people that selecting leaders based upon their social status and formal educational qualifications was a surefire way of ending up with completely crap government. That meritocracy has come to mean something good disappointed him until his dying day. The problem with the common acceptance of the word elite, based upon elite theory, is that it suggests an inevitability, as if being ordered around by a gaggle of black knobs, oligarchs, stakeholder capitalists, and bankers is just the way it is. It is as it always has been, so get used to it. Resistance is futile. Vilfredo Pareto has been credited with coining the term the elite. He offered his circulation of the elite theory, which posited that conflict between elites often sees one group supplant another at the top of the hierarchical social structure. The other aspect of circulation was that individuals move in and out of elite circles. Pareto noted that the elite were human beings capable of doing good, but also of committing great evil, although he maintained that they ruled as a result of their distinguished abilities and exceptional virtues. Wikipedia, which is useful for names, dates, and official histories, but little else, the effective Goebbels compendium for any self-respecting researcher, claims that the American philosopher C. Wright Mills, who spoke about the power elite, is the right guy to go to if you want to understand all there is to know about the elite. Being Wikipedia, that opinion, offered as some sort of fact, is wrong. Mills argued that the power elite just happen. They are an inevitable consequence of modern bureaucratic and technological society. This necessarily places authority in the hands of those who lead its institutions. If the elite, with their control of resources, didn't lead these institutions, he claimed that they wouldn't function. Mills rejected Mosca's concept of the political class. Instead, the elite circulated, as Vilfredo suggested, and rose out of the corporate organizations that dominated the US economy to become the corporate rich. Mills suggested a tripartite model of US society, broadly split into the power elite, the opinion leaders, and the public. This came as a bit of a shock to 1950s Americans who viewed the US as an egalitarian meritocracy. He said that government, local leaders, and interest groups formed the opinion leaders, and the public were powerless, clueless proles who, unwittingly, were completely reliant upon the power elite for their economic survival. The public wrongly imagined that the opinion leaders made the decisions, whereas, as Mills demonstrated, the power elite pervaded the institutions of the economy, the military, and the government. They shared a common perspective and were actually the decision makers. But to Mills's mind, there was no conspiracy to see. The power elite controlled the resources, the economy, and the lives of the little people. He acknowledged that they could make both beneficial and disastrous decisions, but this was just a necessary and unavoidable function of a hierarchical society, he said. In short, Mills's take on elite theory was in keeping with its general trajectory. It is consistently favorable to those who like to be thought of as the elite, even when it criticizes them. Someone's got to be in charge, and, according to nearly all elite theorists, it's the elite. The Iron Law of Oligarchy. Roberto Michael's Iron Law of Oligarchy appeared to demonstrate that modern society, replete with its bureaucratic institutions, division of labor, and hierarchical control of resources, inevitably leads to an oligarch caste. Michaels said that the technical demands of society made oligarch leadership indefensible to the survival of an organization. Like Mills, Mosca, and Pareto, Michaels believed that oligarchs achieved their status because they possessed superior knowledge, skills, and wealth. Michaels added that this enabled them not only to control their own compliant networks, but also dissenting groups. While Mosca viewed the elite's organizational skills as a tool that enabled them to form the political class, Michaels identified the same abilities as key to transforming the political structure into an oligarchy. Essentially, political parties were ruled by oligarchs who held all the power and shaped all the policies. This left the membership and the grassroots party activists flounder around, imagining they had some sort of say over the direction of the party. The elite theory that a society is best managed by a small subset of its constituent members and that somehow this alleged inevitability is evidence of meritocracy can all be traced back to the guardians of Plato's Republic. Plato believed there were three aspects to the nature of man: appetite, spirit, and reason. These elements of the soul or psyche are in constant flux within us all and are either dominant or subservient. Therefore, Plato thought, human society was split into a tripartite structure: the artisans, producers; the auxiliaries, military; and the guardians, rulers. Thus ordered, we can all shut up, work until we drop, die in wars, or, in the case of the rulers, tell people to work until they drop and die in wars. Plato, who was an aristocrat from an extremely wealthy and powerful family of rulers, or guardians, thought that the guardians were so special, gifted in wisdom, intellect, and moral virtue, that they needed to receive the best education, immense advantage, and plenty of time to become the philosopher rulers, just like Plato and his mates. While 19th and early 20th century elite theorists considered ruling oligarchies in nation-states, we now live in a globalized world, and global governance is very much on the cards. The oligarch has gone international. They always were, but that's a topic for another time. David Rothkopf, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, so no conflict of interest there, wrote a whole book about the global parasite class, but called them, unsurprisingly, the superclass. His opinion was very much in keeping with elite theory. The superclass can move billions and shape global markets. They own the lobby industry and are the patrons of political careers the world over, easily able to influence and control government and intergovernmental policy. But once again, the so-called superclass are the inescapable product of meritocracy. These extremely motivated and knowledgeable people, according to Rothkopf, perhaps numbering no more than 6,000 to 7,000, possess real global power. Although they often act in concert, they are global leaders because they just happen to be the global leaders. There's no need for conspiratorial thinking, he said. It seems there never is. If Plato's theory had any merit, you might expect roughly a third of the population to be rulers. Yet, despite the fact that elite theory essentially adding nothing to Plato's ideas, according to David Rothkopf, only about 0.0000875% of us end up being philosopher, guardian, kings. This, we are told, is just the inevitable consequence of meritocracy. Understanding the parasite class. If we really want to understand the parasite class, then we can start by going back more than 2,500 years to the Greek philosopher and polymath Aristotle. Aristotle, Plato's pupil, described the true forms of government as monarchy, the rule of one; aristocracy, the rule of the few; and polity, the rule of the many. Each could govern effectively in the common interest, he said. He also stated that each could be perverted by private interest. A monarchy could be perverted into a tyranny, which Aristotle considered the worst possible form of government. An aristocracy could degenerate into an oligarchy, and the polity could be sufficiently corrupted to devolve into a democracy. Aristotle suggested that government was commonly perverted by private interest. As such, it was likely to be either an oligarchy or a democracy. The distribution of wealth, and more importantly, the political power it could buy, was key to Aristotle's concept on oligarchies and democracies. The real difference between democracy and oligarchy is poverty and wealth. Wherever men rule by reason or their wealth, whether they be few or many, that is an oligarchy, and where the poor rule, that is a democracy. He added, oligarchy is when men of property have government in their hands. Democracy is the opposite, when the indigent and not the men of property are the rulers. Aristotle's apparent notion of democracy, admittedly cobbled together from the remnants of his work on the Athenian construction, wasn't democracy at all. It was something closer to representative democracy, which is more like mob rule. Even without the influence of oligarchs, mob rule is precisely what we get from our modern delusions about democracy. When a big enough bunch of us elect our favorite gang, they make the law. Allegedly, they do so on behalf of the ruling throng. They then enforce the will of the people with threats of violence leveled against anyone who doesn't comply. Mob rule. To grasp what real democracy is, as averse to the Aristotelian misinterpretation we imagine it to be, we need to go back more than 150 years prior to Aristotle to the Greek political reformist Cleisthenes, who established genuine demokratia. Democracy, unlike representative democracy, means government by trial by jury, where randomly selected juries of the people are both the supreme legislator and the final arbiter of justice or natural law. Not politicians, judges, or oligarchs, but genuinely the people. I digress, but the point is, while Aristotle made many telling observations about political systems, he was critiquing a similar kind of democracy to the one that we have to endure today, not true democratia. Winding forward a century or so from Aristotle to the Greek historian Polybius, who wrestled with the contradictions in Aristotle's politics, we get a very dim view of the exercise of power. Polybius stated that the power afforded by wealth corrupts all political systems. Rather like Valfredo's circulation theory, this leads to the revolution of political structures. Monarchies become tyrannies that rule by force and not reason. This leads aristocracies to seize power, which are then corrupted and become unjust. Thus, democracies rise, but they too are perverted by wealth and become extreme democracies led by demagogues, ultimately creating a new kind of monarchy, the Third Reich, for example. Political history, elite theory, and political science reveals that oligarchs rule us. We don't elect any of them. We never have, and the idea that any of us have ever lived in a real democracy is a fiction. More than 2,500 years ago, the question was asked, should the power of a privileged group of people far exceed their size as a percentage of the population? The more or less immediate answer from Plato was a definitive yes. Since then, according to mainstream academia and a brew of specially selected commentators, with the exception of the Marxists and the anarchists, the question has never really been asked again. Marxism and particularly anarchism are taboo. There's a reason for that. So what we are left with has moved beyond normative assertions to empirical arguments, all based on the fundamental presumption that hierarchical structures are an unavoidable necessity of human society and that these must inevitably lead to oligarchies. None of this is unassailable fact. It is all just opinion which, coincidentally, serves the interests of the oligarchs who have been bankrolling academia for millennia. Etienne de la Boétie pointed out that political power is not the product of meritocracy, but usually the result of a conquest of some kind, either at the hands of a foreign power, an internal coup, or through the use of political emergency measures in response to some perceived crisis. Force is consistently used, and it invariably results in the centralization of power in a select group or leader. We accept this despotism not because we don't like the idea of liberty, but because we have become accustomed to being ruled and expect it. There are only two certainties in life, right? Death and taxes. except one of them isn't a certainty at all. We just believe that it is because the people who have always taxed us have taught us to believe it. La Boétie pointed out that they have engineered our consent. This obedience enables our rulers to more easily deploy rhetoric to convince us to accept all manner of travesties. Etienne de la Boétie observed, rulers never undertake an unjust policy, even one of some importance, without prefacing it with some pretty speech concerning public welfare and common good. The French economist Claude Frédéric Bastiat wondered if the suggested social order was any kind of order at all, asking, is it not true that what is most notable in society is the absence of all order? Currently, the oligarchs' pharmaceutical corporations, promoted by government to allegedly fix the crisis that the oligarchs' academic institutions declared, have all been found guilty of medical, scientific, and financial fraud, rulings that had no impact upon them whatsoever. The international monetary and financial system is overseen by a bank that is acknowledged to have laundered Nazi gold stolen from the Jews during the Holocaust. War criminals who lied to deceive both the public and legislatures to support illegal wars that killed millions are delivering well-received speeches at gala events and are frequently feted by the mainstream media as they continue to give us their advice. The oligarchs who lead this global system start wars, loan the money they conjured up from nowhere to the combatant nations, then swoop upon the aftermath, with their banking corporations and their debt restructuring plans to hoover up all the remaining assets for pennies. They then force the same countries to spend the money they lent them on ludicrously expensive reconstruction contracts, thus enabling their engineering corporations to profit from rebuilding the nation that they destroyed with their armaments corporations. What sort of order is that? Where is the rule of law? Inevitable oligarchy. Aristotle considered a rule of law to be a virtue. For it to have value, he thought that it must be moral, capable of administering fair justice to all. It should also be flexible and able to adapt to changing circumstances. Quote, there are two parts of good government. One is the actual obedience of citizens to the laws. The other part is the goodness of the laws which they obey. Like Aristotle, Bastiat recognized that the law means more than just words written on bits of paper. He questioned the assumption that without the law of government, humanity would start raping, pillaging, and killing each other with abandon. Quote, resistance to such acts would manifest itself, in fact, even if specific laws against them were lacking. This resistance is a general law of humanity. It is a far cry from a social order founded on the general laws of humanity to an artificial, contrived, and invented order that does not take these laws into account or denies them or scorns them. An order, in a word, such as some of our modern schools of thought would, it seems, impose upon us. These general laws of humanity form the basis for our social interactions. This is the natural law that we all innately obey regardless of the additional laws written by governments on behalf of oligarchs. Lysander Spooner explains why natural law is all we need to live in peace. Through all time, so far as history informs us, wherever mankind have attempted to live in peace with each other, both the natural instincts and the collective wisdom of the human race have acknowledged and prescribed as an indispensable condition obedience to this one only universal obligation, vis-à-vis that each should live honestly towards every other. The ancient maxim makes the sum of a man's legal duty to his fellow men to be simply this, to live honestly, to hurt no one, to give to everyone his due. This entire maxim is really expressed in the single words, to live honestly, since to live honestly is to hurt no one and give to everyone his due. We only need to look at world events to appreciate that the rule of oligarchs doesn't deliver either peace or justice. It is a worthless social order that, if it exists at all, no one needs. We can also study the principles of natural law to realize that the written laws of government that form the so-called legal system do not concern themselves with moral justice. They merely protect the interests of the oligarchs and are used to subjugate us. But we have natural law and no need of these rules. We also know that the thing we call democracy is not democratia. It is perfectly possible for us to create a social order which has a real rule of natural law, administered by us, using trial by jury as required. So where is the claimed necessity for the rule of oligarchs? The elite theorists allege that large-scale organizations won't function unless the resources they need aren't meted out by the oligarchs. This is complete nonsense. The Scottish natural law philosopher Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations explained how the human desire to serve their own self-interest in the face of competition from others led to an economic structure that didn't need any order imposed upon it. Human nature was the invisible hand that created spontaneous order in free markets. Smith's fellow philosopher of the Scottish Enlightenment, Adam Ferguson, noted that spontaneous order was the result of human action, but not of human design. Later, the economist Friedrich Hayek, building on the idea of spontaneous order, explored pricing in a competitive free market as a means of communication. Price signaled to both the producer and the consumer the shifting underlying costs of materials and production. Left unfettered by interfering oligarchs, this enabled human beings to cooperate, producing the highly complex systems we are familiar with today, without any control from a superfluous oligarchy. Spontaneous order is a reality as exemplified in the wonderful 1958 essay, I, Pencil, by Leonard E. Read, later extolled by the economist Milton Friedman. In I, Pencil, Read examined how the humble pencil is made. The manufacturing process requires a vast global network, yet nowhere in this sprawling international supply chain is anyone compelled to do anything. From the first-person perspective of the pencil, Read wrote, quote, "Neither the worker in the oil field, nor the chemist, nor the digger of graphite or clay, nor any who mans or makes the ships or trains or trucks, nor the one who runs the machine that does the knurling on my bit of metal, nor the president of the company performs his singular task because he wants me. Their motivation is other than me. Perhaps it is something like this. Each of these millions sees that he can thus exchange his tiny know-how for the goods and services he needs or wants. There is a fact still more astounding. The absence of a mastermind, of anyone dictating or forcibly directing these countless actions which bring me into being. No trace of such a person can be found. Instead, we find the invisible hand at work." End quote. This is how most of our global economy functions. To those, like the elite theorists and the oligarchs, who say that spontaneous order is impossible, we can safely say we know it works because we use it every day. It is how most human interactions already operate. So what is this ridiculous idea that we need a bunch of violent robber barons to hoard all the resources so that they can control when and where we are allowed to use them? On what planet is it inevitable that a tiny clique of entirely self-appointed rulers simply has to command not only the planet's economy and its monetary system, but its distribution networks and political processes too? Imagine the explosion in technological innovation if research and development wasn't controlled by oligarchs. Think about the genuine advances in medicine and healthcare if they didn't own the whole sector and weren't running it for their own profit. Consider the solutions we would find to the many problems we face if academics, scientists, engineers, philosophers, builders, teachers, journalists, and everyone else in society was free to explore their interests, their passions, and talents without having to work towards an artificial agenda created to serve the ambitions of eugenicists. Despite everything they have done to us and continue to do, we have no right to harm the oligarchs. Where crimes have been committed, they should face justice, just like the rest of us. But that justice needs to be better than any justice we could ever expect from them. Otherwise, what have we achieved? The biggest lie we have swallowed is that the oligarch is special. They are not. They are just human beings, exactly the same as the rest of us, with all the same qualities and failings. While they cooperate and steer agendas to suit their overarching objectives, oligarchs are not all of one mind and don't always agree. History, especially political history, is largely a record of the conflicts between them as much as it is a chronicle of our struggle. Oligarchs aren't uniquely evil or virtuous. They don't possess extraordinary ability, but aren't unusually inept either. They are the same as the rest of us. As the philosophers of the Scottish Enlightenment and many others have observed, we are all just acting in our own self-interest. Aristotle and Polybius understood that the problem is and has always been that great wealth empowers people politically. When immeasurably wealthy people act in their own self-interests, what is their purpose? It cannot be simply to accrue more wealth. Why do you want more of something you already have in excessive abundance? The oligarch's self-interest is served by extending their power. This isn't an argument against wealth. It is an argument against a political system led by those whose primary goal is more power. Collectively, we are equally responsible for our oppression at the hands of oligarchs. We have passively allowed them to rule from behind the curtain while knowing they were there. We cannot absolve ourselves of our responsibility for what they have done, nor can we avoid the responsibility to end this pernicious system any more than we can exonerate ourselves from our responsibility to construct a better one. The rule of oligarchs contributes nothing to society. They simply exploit us for their own ends and restrict human social, economic, and political development. The parts of elite theory that claims to scientifically explain the inevitability of oligarchs is pap. The definition of a parasite is an organism that lives on or in another and derives its nourishment therefrom. The definition of social class is a group of people within a society who possess the same socio-economic status. An oligarch's only socio-economic peer is another oligarch. Their collective effect upon global society is parasitic. All the institutions of state are aligned to encourage us to call oligarchs the elite. We are now told that to speak of them in disparaging terms constitutes a hate crime, yet to speak of them with unbridled reverence is perfectly acceptable. The whole point of the censorship and the threats is to socially engineer and control us. We are told to respect oligarchs, and if we don't, we can expect to be punished. Unless we break free from the linguistic chains that bind our thoughts and control how we discuss our social problems, which oligarch rule most certainly is, we're screwed. I oppose, on moral grounds, causing anyone harm. I want to see justice prevail, but I will not be forced by anyone to refer to people who pose a threat to me and my loved ones with unreserved respect. Oligarchs are the parasite class.